People who have met their online friends, what made you instantly regret it? Met my best friend at the time on League of Legends. After talking every day for 3 years, I ended up moving to a state much closer to him, so we decided to finally meet. We talked before about all the things we'd do together and how awesome it would be. I loved him so much. He was there for me through so much and was a wonderful friend. He had a new girlfriend at the time of our meetup, and he brought her along with him. I had no problem with this, because I'd love to meet the woman who makes him happy. It was abundantly clear from the get-go that she wasn't a real big fan of me. I did my best to be kind and still had tons of fun. I didn't hear from my friend much after that. A mutual good friend of ours messaged me, and when I asked about my best friend, they said that his girlfriend was telling people that I was basically an awful person for whatever reason. 3 years later, he is engaged to this woman, and I'm happy for him, but I haven't spoken to him in those 3 years. I still miss him every day, and I wish I could be there for him on his wedding day. Maybe not regret it. But it gave me years of depression. I met my best friend through Minecraft. I never made friends in this, and I just wanted to play with someone. I have no idea why, so I complimented this girl's skin. We started talking. She was American, I'm Polish, and my English sucked. We moved to Skype, and at first I mostly typed, but later on she started teaching me English somehow by talking with me. She was 1 year older. We knew each other for almost a year, and I was staying up all night just to talk to her and her friends that she introduced to me. She was also depressed, so we talked with each other, and she was the first person that truly listened to me. We had plans of visiting each other. And then our mutual friend told me she committed suicide. 4 years passed by, and now at least I can talk about it and not cry. Still miss her very much, though. Was 13 and had a 20-year-old pen pal in Hong Kong, both of us female. We met on Tumblr and emailed each other regularly. My parents were ceased in all our correspondence, and we basically just talked about our cultures. About a year of us talking went by, and she said that her university allowed her to study abroad in Europe for a semester, and she chose my country. Fun. I was excited. However, some time went by, and our friendship kind of faded, to the point where I had forgotten she was even coming to my country. About 2 weeks before she was supposed to come, she emailed me that her student accommodation had to be cleaned out, so she couldn't access it on the night that she arrived. She needed a place to stay for one night. I asked my mom, and she agreed to pick her up from the airport with me, and she could stay with us for one night. I mean, we trusted this girl. I was very open about my friendship with her, we had pictures and everything. So 2 weeks later, we pick her up from the airport. And we didn't click. She kind of annoyed me, but it was late, so we just went home. We get home and get her settled. We went up to my room, she gave me some presents, and we chatted a little bit. She says, "Thanks for letting me stay here this semester." Huh? Excuse me? This semester? I asked her, like, what do you mean? You can stay here tonight. We can see each other during the weekends if you want to hang out, but you can't stay here. She goes quiet. We go to sleep. At this point I just wanted her to go away. And I got what I wanted. The next morning I wake up, and she's gone. I don't even know how she got out, because we locked the doors at night, but she just vanished. We have special locks that you need a key for to open, and the key was somewhere else in the house. Yes, I think this is a fire hazard. No, my mom can't be convinced it's unnecessary. Her suitcase was still there. I tried calling her, she didn't pick up. She eventually texted me, asking if my mother could drop off her suitcase at a train station 40 minutes away at a certain time. My mother brought the suitcase, and that was that. Never seen her or spoken to her again after that. It was my friend Kate who befriended this girl, Jessica, who allowed us to come and stay with her when we traveled to the US. Jessica was rude to me instantly and kept my friend away from me. I'd go upstairs, and she'd find a reason for them to go downstairs. She had Kate share her bedroom, and she'd lock the door for hours, and so I'd just go off and do my own thing. We met her two friends, and they both ignored me. When it was time for Kate and me to move on to another state, Jessica insisted on coming with us. The lady we stayed with in another state, Robin, took no shit and called Jessica out on her strange behavior. Jessica proceeded to lock herself in a room and demanded Kate stay in there with her. They were in there all day, and eventually Kate came out and said to me that there's something wrong with Jessica and she's actually scared. We, Kate and I, had plans to stay with another online friend, Matt, in another state, and Jessica demanded we cancel because she doesn't like or trust Matt. We said no, this is our holiday, and we've paid for flights, and Jessica said then she will come with us, but we can't meet up with Matt. We said no, she cried, and we left. Kate blocked her on everything. Kate's mother called us not long after, saying Jessica contacted her crying, saying Kate is in danger and we abandoned Jessica, and she's so concerned for my friend's safety. Edit to add, as I recall, she claimed to be concerned about Matt and basically wanted Kate's mom to tell us to stay with Jessica. It was actually incredibly scary. Kate found out later from another girl, Jane, they all knew each other from a forum, that Jessica had been telling everyone they were in love and had even slept together. I don't know how much of that is true, but I've known Kate for 20 years now, and she's never identified as anything but straight. She denied it 100%. Jessica was just obsessed with her, and months later Kate heard Jessica was telling everyone she was saving money to come to our country to find Kate. She never did, thankfully. Other than the time spent with this girl, we had a great holiday and made some good friends. I still talk to Matt, he's great.
I, F22, had a friend, M26, online for 11 years before we met.
I'm Canadian, he's American. We met on an RP site when we were quite literally still kids and were a massive part of one another's lives, especially during our teenage years. We spoke every day through text and on the phone, had each other on social media, and even knew and sometimes spoke to each other's family and friends in real life. He called me his light and his sister, and I called him my brother. We were family. It would take a whole novel to explain our 11-year friendship and what we have been through together, but I'll just try to make it short by saying he had a very shitty and unstable life and a lot of mental health problems. He was a narcissist. I spent many years being his emotional crutch and punching bag, helping him find jobs, and being there for his breakdowns. I never broke off the friendship because after all those years, I kind of felt responsible for him. Anyways, last year we finally decided to meet. We were both grown adults and saved money to go on a 10-day trip to a dream destination of mine in the States. I knew this likely would not go well. I knew he was a narcissist, but I just had to meet him. I had to meet my brother, the guy that was there for over a decade. I needed to see him face to face. On this trip he abandoned me on a mountain during a hike because he decided he wanted weed. When he came back, I was obviously mad and wanted to go back to our hotel, but he told me to wait for him in the car while he did the hike on his own. I took an Uber home, and he returned as well 4 hours later. Automatically assumed I'd shell out $300 for him to buy a laptop he wanted, without asking me. Just brought me to the store to look around while we waited for our movie to start at the theater and sprung it on me. I refused. Was overall inconsiderate. We only ate at places where he wanted to eat when he wanted to eat. Only did things he wanted to do and not me, despite the trip being my idea. I missed out on a lot because he just wanted to sit around and do nothing. And so much more. What hurt the most is when I confronted him about it, he told me, "You're not my girlfriend, I don't need your approval or need to change for you to like me." I cut the friendship off and blocked him when we returned home. I also plan on retaking my dream trip one day and doing it properly this time. I used to play Counter-Strike 1.6 with one of the funniest and most lively guests I've ever met. He was a linchpin for half a dozen other guys in a friendship group that he welcomed me into. They lived about 200 miles south of me in the south of England. For several years we talked and played games together. He would brighten my day. I've never loved a friend like I loved him. Before I met him, I had no idea he was sick. Really sick. He had muscular dystrophy, for which there is no cure and is a progressively debilitating disease. His form started by paralyzing his legs and working its way up to his arms and eventually his lungs. It wasn't until a few days before I had arranged for my first ever trip down there that he told me about it. It didn't faze me in the slightest, it made me want to go see him even more. I only saw him in real life twice before he died about a year later. I regret that I couldn't go to his funeral. It was too far away, and I couldn't make it. He got freakishly obsessive and possessive. Met online through a fandom. After a few years, the fandom pretty much fell apart, but a handful of us stayed friends because we actually had a fair amount in common. D was very normal, the rest of the group seemed to love him. About 4 years after just being online mates, we met in person. It went fine. We interacted a lot on FB and Instagram. I hit a really busy period in my life but managed to squeeze in a Christmas get-together at my place for my little group of friends, including D. After that, my online activity decreased drastically due to being busy, and when I managed to get on FB, I noticed that most of the group was no longer friends with D. Weird, but whatever. I checked my messenger and saw message after message after message asking why I wasn't responding. What was I doing? Could we arrange a meetup? Etc. I explained I was super busy and it was also coming up to the anniversary of my mom's death, so just give me some time and we'll see about meeting up another time. He said, oh yeah, I forgot about the anniversary, you can have that day, but I expect a response after. Fuck that, I blocked him, so he sent email after email after email asking me, what is your fucking problem? What the fuck do you think you're doing? Etc., so I blocked his email too. After 3 very peaceful weeks, there was a knock on my door. It was D, and he had a 6-page letter detailing why we had to be friends. I shut the door and used an anonymous email thing to tell him if he contacted me again / showed up at my door, I would call the police. Went on FB and told everyone, including the 2 remaining mutual friends, about it all and could the mutuals not share anything about me / my life and actively discourage him from attempting to make contact. The friends who had long since unfriended him started messaging me that they stopped talking to him because of how creepy he was being in PMs about me, always asking if they knew what I was doing, had I talked to them, was I seeing anyone, was I actually busy because he was convinced I wasn't, etc. In return I told them how he'd been trying to convince me to stop being friends with them because, according to him, they were all sorts of horrible things and that they were incredibly jealous and hated how close he and I were. I assumed he was just butthurt because they stopped talking to him, so he was just making up a bunch of crap about these people who had always been perfectly nice to me. One incredibly weird occurrence just before this all happened was me telling a mutual on FB that I was heading to the aquarium in London with my daughter. The mutual friend was also in London that day with their daughter, and maybe we could grab a coffee / let the kids play in the park for a bit. I checked my messages later that evening, and D was incredibly upset because he'd waited at Farringdon Station exit for 2 hours so he could come to the aquarium too, and I didn't show up. We did not get off at that station, but one that was 2 stops after and closer to where we were going. I haven't heard a peep in over a year. He has apparently deleted his FB and Instagram and thankfully just disappeared. The lady was crazy. We met through an app that was advertised as a meet friends app and not a dating app. Well, it turns out it was a dating app. However, she put in her bio that she was married with 2 kids. I put that I was in a long-term relationship and looking for friends. BTW, I'm a guy. She wasn't. So when we arranged a meetup, her husband and 2 kids were there as well as my girlfriend. Everything was going great. Hung out a few times and added each other on Facebook. Turns out, she was super into the whole breastfeeding in public thing. Like, I get it. You go, girl. But she was super obsessed with it. 4 out of every 5 pics she posted to FB were her boob in her kid's mouth. She got angry when you looked away when in public. Like, she wanted you to stare at her while she breastfed. I just got to the point that I was super uncomfortable with it and moved on. The amount of desperation that girl had. Holy shit. The first issue was she used a picture of herself when she was younger and thinner. She used to be around 120 pounds, I believe she told me. She was easily over 300 pounds and couldn't walk for long. Eventually she took out a cane. I didn't know how to react to a 21-year-old using a cane. Someone injured? Sure. Someone that spent 90% of their time watching YouTube and reading animes. Not fine. We walked, sat, walked, sat, walked, sat, and talked for a bit. She warned me she has anger issues and might snap at me at any random time. She would constantly look at her phone and sigh loudly. We met up basically on a date to see a movie. When watching the movie, she would constantly burp and fart during every romantic scene. She would cheer herself on every time too. In the fucking theater. After the date was over, I didn't want to see her again, but apparently I left a good impression. She would call me constantly every night. Usually crying about how much she hates where she lives, how much she hates why she can't leave, etc., etc. She wanted a relationship to rescue her from there. Life would be better if she had a boyfriend and just did her own thing. The only jobs she had were at fast food places. Those didn't last long. Each one is 2 to 3 months at most. She constantly smelled like fish. She dropped out of college because, in her words, I couldn't stand the stuck-up people there. They really made it unbearable. Also, she does not like studying. After a while, she stopped contacting me. I believed that she had taken the hint and backed off. In reality, she went to another guy who is basically the literal definition of 4chan's soy boy, though much worse. He can barely keep down a job, he can barely maintain himself, he drinks himself silly, and she is just happy to be away from her family. She started contacting me again, begging me to save her from him, and I'm like, I have a girlfriend now. Bye. She left a 16-page Facebook rant. Haven't heard from her since. I used to draw a lot on /x/ and generally browse 4chan. I was going through a lot of depression, and I felt alienated from friends and family. as well as the death of a long relationship. Somehow, just talking to other people about the most mundane stuff felt so amazing. I was in a few Skype groups, we would chat about life, play online games, and stuff. One couple was nice and the guy was trying to quit smoking. Another guy just got a promotion at work. You know, real people with lives. They all were far away. Until I get this email. I was going to delete it because it seemed weird, but I read it. It was a case of mistaken identity. He thought I was this person who also did modeling/cosplay or something because of my email name. I corresponded and corrected them, but we just kept talking. He also loved paranormal stuff, was into films and writing too, and was close by. After a month or so of daily talks and texts, we wanted to hang out. Between all this, I was moving out and in a bad spot emotionally, but he was very nice and talked me through anxious parts. I met him, and sparks flew. No, actually I couldn't look him in the eyes and got sweaty because I realized how cute he was and how much I felt like an idiot. We did kiss, and as cliche as it sounds, it felt like when Dorothy entered Oz, my life had color again. Anyway, it ended well because we're getting married this year. So this one weirdly changed my life. So for context, I live in Ireland, and my friend lived in Scotland. I met this guy on Xbox when I was like 14, and he was 16, back in 2012. Got to know each other super well and talked every day and played Halo and Mass Effect 3 together. We did this for 3 years, and I would have considered him one of my best friends at the time. But I'd never met him. I knew all about his life, I'd spoken to some of his family before. So I was known by some of his IRL friends too. In year 4 his 360 died, so then he got an Xbox One and I got a PS4. Because of the consoles, we stopped talking a lot. We would catch up every now and then on Facebook and whatnot. This all changed in 2017 when he got engaged to a girl I remember him dating when we were talking. A few weeks later I start getting messages about the wedding. He contacted me to be one of his groomsmen. Now 16-year-old me made a promise that I'd go to his wedding. So I said, yeah, sure, of course. I had just fucked myself. He later told me the wedding was in the US, which means I had to start saving to go. Let's skip to 2018. I fly out to the US for the wedding, and I get to the hotel where everyone is staying. I text the groom and ask where everyone is. They are out for food. So I go get a cab and follow them out. I walk into the restaurant. He very quickly spotted me and ran over, called out my old gamer tag, and hugged me. I didn't realize how small he was. I'm only 6 feet 1 inch, I expected him to be taller. But after that night I found out that without something to focus on, video games, he could actually be a little bit annoying, and I had just committed to being stuck in a mansion for 4 days after this. At the time I was in a 2-year-long relationship with someone who wasn't making me happy. At the wedding I met one of the groomwomen, there were 2 girls and 3 guys, and instantly we clicked. We both also slagged the groom, so we kind of bonded on that. We just got on super well, and we decided to hang out the whole wedding. She was also in a relationship. One of the nights we kissed, and after that I knew it was over with my now ex. After the wedding, I was flying out on the same day as her, and we were in the same terminal. We had a nice goodbye. I got home and broke it off with my ex. That night the girl from the wedding got dumped. We saw each other on and off for a month or 2, and after that we started to get serious. I'm still with her, and it's the happiest I've ever been with someone. Guy I met on a Neopets fan site, shut up, when I was 12 to 13. The site ended up going down, but a bunch of us stayed in touch on DeviantArt, shut up, and MSN Messenger. It was the early 2000s, okay? Never met him in person, but I would stay up all night online during the summer and chat with people on MSN. I knew some of the people from the old Neopets fan site were older teenagers and that this dude was an actual adult. Can't remember how old exactly, maybe 20 to 30. But he'd been pretty cool up to now in the year or 2 I'd known him. Suddenly he wanted me to send him a picture of myself to know what I looked like. I wasn't cool with that, so I sent him a drawing, from my DeviantArt. Shut up. He said something along the lines of it wasn't good enough, and he wanted to see what I actually looked like. I remember expressing I wasn't comfortable with that, but he kept pushing back and insisting on it. I said something like if you were my friend, you wouldn't keep asking, and he replied with something like I knew you'd say something like that. Little Red Maiden stranger danger sense started going off, and I eventually just blocked him and lost touch completely. Met a fellow 7th grader on Xbox, and we were pretty great friends. Even after I quit playing Xbox, we still kept in touch. He only lived 2 towns over, but it was right on the edge of where my parents would drive me. So at high school graduation, I finally made it out to see him for the first time. We were having fun until I asked him, "Hey, is blank coming?" Blank was a middle school girlfriend he had that we'd talk about a lot because I'd third wheel a lot of Xbox Live parties with them, and we had a bit of inside jokes. He and his friends winced and chuckled, kind of the awkward reaction I was aiming for, and then I pieced together from old memories that the other dude in his friend group used to date her too and how they'd gloat about being Eskimo brothers, so he'd probably remember who I was from Xbox as well. After a few more jokes, my friend leans in on me and goes, "Hey, I know you're not from around the area or anything, but she died in a car accident a few months ago." I immediately shut up and left. They told me they were fine with it all and we should hang out again, but when you're making explicit jokes about someone whose obituary stated they played piano for the church in consecutive years on the honor roll, you don't really want to go back round those parts. Nightmare week. When I was 13, I met this girl online, and we got really close. She lived in the south of the country, and I lived in the center, Portugal for reference. Everything was fine. We liked the same bands and were both just teenage fangirls. We became really close and wanted to meet. Now, my 13-year-old brain did not see all the red flags. First, she became really possessive over me. I couldn't speak with any of my other online friends without her knowing. She would go through my Facebook and Tumblr to see what I was doing, and she was really jealous every time my family bought me anything, as her mom couldn't afford it. We eventually got over the band we liked, and she introduced me to another band, which I started to love and read fanfics about. Big mistake. She started trying to get onto my Tumblr likes and my Wattpad and YouTube history just so she could see if I was looking, reading, or watching anything related to them, and if I was, she would go off on me and say she saw them first and they were hers and I had no right to like them or even read fanfics about them. I got all my accounts private and hid my likes from her. Even after all of this, we were best friends, and I wanted to meet her. So one of my mom's friends that worked at the place she lived took me there, and we finally met. I was going to stay for 2 weeks and go up with my mom's friend again later on. When I got there, the first few days were amazing. We were really close and loved being with each other. Then she started treating me like shit, ignoring me and wanting me to sleep in her little sister's room and be out of her room for once. I didn't get why, and I tried to confront her about it, and she said sorry, and everything was fine for a day. Her mom was barely home and treated her like shit. There was barely any food at home, and sometimes the most I would eat in a day would be a sandwich. She started again, being very cold and very bitchy and aggressive, and I decided I had enough and I wanted to go home. Of course, I called my mother crying, saying I was done and I couldn't stay for another week. Well, her friend that was supposed to pick me up in a week couldn't do it anymore, and I would have to stay 2 more weeks. I had absolutely had enough, and I said I couldn't care less and decided I would get a bus home and just leave this place as I was going insane. The day before my trip home, I dropped my phone in the toilet. And the next day it didn't work. I was 13, traveling by myself for 5 hours and doing something I had never done before. I packed my stuff the next day and went. I was alone on the bus, hungry as fuck, with no money, no sleep, and no way to contact my mother. I got a bus directly to the capital of the country, which is where I was supposed to wait and catch another bus home. I got out and realized my bus was 3 hours away and I had already traveled 3 hours. So I sat down on the floor and cried my eyes out. I felt tired and defeated as well as starved because I didn't eat dinner last night or breakfast or lunch that morning. My phone didn't work either, so I just had to wait. Lucky for me, one of the buses that went home was early, but it wasn't my bus. I showed my ticket to the bus driver, and he told me this bus was not correct and I had to wait. But when he looked at me, he said to get in, and he would take me anyway. I'm still grateful to this man to this day, and I'll never forget the look of pity he gave me when he saw me. When I got to the bus station, my parents weren't there yet, so with the little change I had, I went to a payphone and called them. They were close, so I just waited. When my mom arrived, I ran to her and cried so much in her arms. At the end, I lost 10 pounds during that week, and I swore never again. We talked for a few months until I blocked her on everything, as I couldn't deal with her jealousy and envy anymore, so I shut her out. We didn't speak for more than 2 years, and then she contacted me with a huge paragraph saying sorry she was mean. We occasionally speak, and I follow her on Instagram. Though, she stalked me to a uni in England and to the same course, which I found extremely creepy. Luckily, I had changed uni by then, as I didn't like that one and didn't see her again. She ended up dropping out and going to Portugal again. She is still envious and self-obsessed. At this point I only follow her because it gives me peace that I grew up and matured. 6 years later, she kept some of my clothes I forgot at hers and never told me I left them behind. I noticed when I saw pictures of her and her sister wearing my clothes on their Instagram stories. This story took place over a decade ago when I was a senior in high school. Some of the details are a little fuzzy. I met a girl who blogged on the same site I did. Let's call her Sarah. We were the same age, but she lived in a nearby town and went to a different high school. We had been talking online for a month or two and then decided to watch a movie at her place. The date was awkward, but not awful. We kissed, nothing more. However, I could tell that she was more into it than I was. I didn't want a relationship, and she definitely did. We had already talked about this. So when she broached the topic of a relationship a few days later, I told her that I had fun on our date, and I liked her, but still felt the same. I didn't want to get into a relationship before I left for college. She appeared to understand and took it okay, online. I knew she was disappointed, and I really felt bad for her because I knew how that felt, but she said she agreed with me and wanted to do the same thing. We were the same age. I still think I made the right call. That's when things got weird. One night a few weeks later, I was sitting outside a coffee shop in a crowded shopping center when an SUV pulled into the parking lot going about 45 miles per hour. Just absolutely flying. It was really dangerous. The SUV drives past me sitting outside the coffee shop, window rolled down, and I see Sarah in the backseat holding a plastic red Solo cup. I hadn't told her I would be there, but it was one of my regular hangout spots, so she likely knew to look for me there. "Fuck your dick." She screams at me as they pass, and she throws the cup out the window. It hits the sidewalk in front of me, and I can smell that it's full of booze. They haul ass around the parking lot and come back for another pass. I'm gathering my things to go inside at this point, but she continues to hurl insults at me from the window as her friends drive her around. I don't remember exactly what happened after that, but I basically stayed inside until the SUV left, and then I left and drove back home to my parents' house for the night. Then at about 2 a.m., my dad comes into my room. I was asleep, school night. "There's someone out on the front lawn. They're screaming your name." It turns out Sarah had figured out where I lived, maybe they followed me home? And her awful drunk friends had driven her over to my parents' house at midnight on a school night and just left her there. She was lying on her back out on the lawn, screaming at the top of her lungs. "I hate you, nosebleed. Fuck your dick." Such a strange insult that no one has ever said to me since. My dad got her some water and helped her to her feet. He contacted her folks and drove her to an all-night diner where they picked her up. I don't remember the details of our follow-up conversations. I remember that she apologized and felt embarrassed. But it was also clear she had an unhealthy attachment to me. To be honest, I wasn't very nice to her after that. I told her politely but firmly that I didn't want her in my life. Cut to freshman year of college, 4 hours away from my hometown. Who do I see on campus but Sarah? She'd never mentioned she was interested in this college, and she knew I was going there. Fortunately, for both of us, that is where the story ends. I never did learn if she followed me there, or if it was just a coincidence. I didn't see her much at college. We had different friend groups, and she did her own thing mostly. She might have messaged me once or twice, but I didn't reply, and eventually, she quit contacting me. The funniest thing is, I spent about an hour reading through all the responses on this thread, thinking to myself, man, I don't have any crazy stories like that. I had totally forgotten about this incident until a voice, somewhere in the deep, dark recesses of my memory, called out to me in a harsh whisper, "Fuck your dick." So I was in a Discord chat with a bunch of random people. I met a guy who was only 2 years older than me and lived in my state. We started talking for a while, and we got super close. We both wanted to meet up, and it turned out we were both going to go to the same cosplay convention. We were excited, but then he said, "My brother is going to come too. I told him about you, and he thinks you seem cool." I was okay with it at the time. Now, I didn't regret meeting up with my friend. We are actually still super close to this day. I regretted meeting his brother. We both drove to the hotel and met up there. We found our room, and I plugged my Nintendo Switch into the TV so we could play Mario Kart. Now here is where the creepiness begins. I choose Rosalina, and his brother says, "Of course you would pick the sexiest character." I just kind of awkwardly chuckled and continued playing. He continued to say weird, flirty things the rest of the night. The next day we went to the con, and I was dressed as a Mimikyu from Pokemon, my friend was Pikachu, and his brother was a Team Skullgrunt. We had a lot of fun, but the brother kept getting really close and putting his hands on my shoulders and shit like that. Then he throws a Pokeball at me. I played along, and it was pretty funny, but he says afterwards, "You're my Pokemon, so you do me favors from now on." And slapped me hard on the ass. I noped out of there and tracked down my friend, who was at one of the seller's booths. I told him everything, and he just confronted his brother, who proceeded to walk around the con by himself. I still meet up with my friend, but he comes to my house so I don't have to see his brother. I have 2 friends I've been gaming with for almost 10 years that I eventually met IRL. One became a complete disaster, and I barely talk to him anymore. Referring to him as E, the other I'm actually dropping back off at the airport at this very moment, and I wish it hadn't gone as awkwardly as it did. Referring to him as A. We all used to play various Steam games together. On Fridays we still typically end our work week by getting drunk and hanging out in Discord.
E, A, and I all met on Killing Floor back in the day.
I've never kept it a secret that my husband and I are non-monogamous. Naturally, I had a flirtatious relationship with one of them, E. We dated a bit. I'd fly to Seattle to spend the weekend with him, and he'd come see us from time to time. There wasn't anything too weird at first. E was just a little awkward IRL, kind of shut down emotionally and introverted. But my husband and he got along really well. Everyone is kind of awkward sometimes, so I dropped it. It seemed like a good fit. After a few months, it became clear E was taking the casual meetups really seriously. If it wasn't just sex and fun dates for him, he seemed to believe that we could somehow make a real relationship work, and he was investing a lot in me emotionally. I bluntly told him that wasn't the case, that I'm married to who I'm married to, and I apologized if I didn't make my intentions clear. He seemed fine for a few weeks. Friday night rolls around, we all get in Discord, and start gaming together, but E is drinking hard and isn't holding his liquor well. He stops us every few minutes so he can try to puke. We encourage him to go to bed. It'll be Friday again next week, and we'll all be on again. He refuses to get off and is too drunk to understand what an absolute buzzkill he's being. I message everyone separately and tell them to say we all need to go to bed, hoping he'll just log off and crash out. We waited until it looked like he'd signed out and all rejoined the channel to resume our gaming. It turned out E hadn't signed out, he'd just gone invisible, and when he saw us all get back on, he lost his shit. He assumed that we tricked him because we didn't like him instead of it just being that he was wasted and being kind of annoying that night. I assumed our years of gaming and eventual dating meant he understood that we had a really decent friendship and I didn't secretly hate him or something. E starts texting my husband, saying he was going to die tonight, and don't tell me, but he's been feeling suicidal over losing me for weeks, and his gun is right there with some ammunition. He just really freaked out. So my husband starts the long, drawn-out process of getting a hold of the correct police department. We live in Colorado, and I start calling and texting E, freaking out, thinking he'd already killed himself because he wasn't answering. I even found and started messaging one of his oldest friends on Facebook, asking if he could make it to E's house, but he was drunk too, given it was a Friday night, and E wouldn't answer his calls either. The Seattle cops ended up breaking down E's door and waking up his mom and sister, who had no idea any of this was happening, and pulling him out of his house, straight to the hospital. They confiscated his gun. Needless to say, E has apologized and tried to convince me he's getting help and wants to just be friends again, but I'm pretty wary. Also to be noted, A was in the Discord chat the night E lost his shit and had nothing nice to say about him after that. I also just got out of our car to catch his flight back home, and I'm pretty relieved about it. So all of that happened with E about 7 months ago. I seemed pretty happy he'd dropped out of our gaming group, and after this weekend I realized it's because he was actually jealous of E and my dating. I met A in Killing Floor before I met E. I'd only just gotten a laptop to game on and was horrifically bad at using a mouse and keyboard. A was great about it. He was really patient and gave me some great advice and really made the experience enjoyable. Fast forward to 8 years later, A and I have always had a good friendship. We keep up with weekly gaming in each other's lives. I've never been romantically interested in A, and he had just been through a bad breakup with a long-term partner who he'd proposed to before she walked out on him. I felt super bad, so my husband and I invited him to CO to hang out for a few days. I bought the tickets before talking to us completely. He booked it for 5 days instead of a weekend, and it happened to be on a week when I couldn't take time off of work, so he and my husband ended up hanging out more. Night 1, I'm having a few beers with him and hanging out, and he's really pushing my personal space. Standing super close, hovering over me. He's not a small dude. I try to subtly move back or move around him, find a chair to sit in, and kind of use my body language to signal that I'm not comfortable. Anytime I look away or do something else, I start staring at me really intently. I shook it off as maybe it's just some jet lag and alcohol, or maybe he's just happy we're meeting or whatever. While I'm at work Friday, my husband and A apparently fool around a bit. My husband tells me that they didn't get very far because A said he wanted to wait for me. My husband tells A he's pretty sure I'm not interested, that I haven't been dating or anything since shit went crazy with E. I said he understood. My husband isn't feeling well Friday night, so he's already in bed. I'm hanging out with A in the kitchen, having a beer, and he suddenly gets really still and kind of awkwardly lunges at me for a hug. I laugh it off and hug him back, but I'm feeling super weird. Then out of nowhere he bites my neck a few times, like you would if you were making out with someone, and just kind of stares at me. Again, he's much bigger than I am, and my husband is vaguely drunk, mostly sick off some food we ate in the other room, so I wipe my neck and kind of laugh it off again like, the fuck, dude? But at this point I'm thinking I already know what A is thinking, and I try to nicely redirect him. He proceeds to tell me that he's been waiting for his turn to hook up with me, and he's seen me date all these other guys, and we've been friends for so long, why not him, etc. I'm floored. I try again to tell him that that's just not how I feel, but I can see he's got this resentment on his face, and after that, for the rest of the weekend, I can't hug or kiss my husband or talk about anything remotely related to dating or anything without getting this look from him. It blew my mind. I genuinely thought we were friends, not that he was just waiting for his turn to fuck me. So, two really long-term gaming buddies are potentially down the drain after IRL meetings. Not me, but a female friend did and really regretted it. They were in a WoW guild together, and he seemed okay. He eventually found out where she lived and flew from Canada to Alabama and then drove for nearly 2 hours to her home and got let in by her clueless uncle. He went and sat on her bed until she came out of the bathroom. All of this was completely unplanned and unannounced. He showed up thinking he was going to sweep her off her feet and away from her boyfriend. He told her as much, and she freaked out and kicked him out of her house. The real kicker is he tried it again 7 months later. This time he had also been messaging her boyfriend and all her friends, showing them fake message logs between her and him about how much they were in love and how much she hated them. Luckily the friends got wise pretty fast and started talking about it and figured it out. After this, they booted him from the guild, and he actually made a new account and got back in for a while but eventually got caught because of his typing habits, and he started asking about her again. He has also tried a few times over the last 7 years to find a way to talk to her. To this day she's still afraid of him just showing up again, but luckily she doesn't live anywhere near where she did, and she's more cautious with her information. I lived with my mom. She was gaslighting me and emotionally abusing me for most of my life, making me feel crazy. I worked a 60-ish hour work week every week, making $9 an hour to take care of her, my sister, and to pay for my apartment. Well, my online friends started telling me about gaslighting, explaining what it is and how things I've described sound just like it. Like her making me believe she gave me money even though I knew she hadn't. Making me think I was crazy. Slapping me in the face and then saying she never did it and pretending to be concerned about my mental state. Well anyway. My main friend in my friend group, we will call him Paul, and I talked every day all the time and had for 2 years. Paul is married with a young son. Paul said I should leave. If I moved down to where they lived, Paul would help me get a job. I wasn't sure. Paul brought me and another friend, who I had liked, together, and we started dating. Paul said, "Now you should really move down." My now boyfriend friend, Steve, agreed. So I did. One day after having enough, I decided to, and Steve came down to visit, and I told my family I was leaving with him. Paul helped me get a job where he worked. Paul drove me to work all the time. We carpooled. My relationship with Steve was going wonderfully. Then Paul told me he had had feelings for me. He wanted me. I said no. You're married. He dropped it for a few weeks, only making jokes about it every so often. But then Paul decided to act. He started flirting hard. I think he was joking. He just made jokes. Until one night in the car, Paul placed his hands on my knee. I pushed it off. He put it back. It continued like that for days. I got tired of pushing him off and saying no to resting his hand on my knee. So I figured whatever, Paul can rest his hand on my knee, maybe it's a comfort thing. Paul took that as a sign to move further. I said no. He did that for days. I worried, what can I do? Can I tell? It's Paul's house. Will anyone believe me? Will Steve think I lied and leave me? I don't know why I thought he would, but I did. So I didn't say anything. And then Paul started touching me, first for a few days on the outside of my pants. I'd try to stop him, but he would just put his hand back. I tried to set things on my lap, but he just moved them. I gave up. He touched me, and for months I pretended it was fine. Even though I hated it. I felt dirty and guilty. Slowly he'd do more and more. I'd say no at first, but he'd always break me. My stomach started to hurt all the time. Twist and turn. It hurt bad enough to make me cry, and I hoped it meant something was wrong so I could get out of the situation. But deep down I knew it was hurting because of what was going on. I called Steve one day, wanting to tell him. Tired of everything. And somehow the conversation ended up with me asking, "What's the worst thing I could do that would make you hate me?" And he said, "Cheat with Paul." I forgot to mention Paul is married to Steve's sister. Which meant if I told, I'd break up a marriage and a family. Or that I'd be kicked out in an unfamiliar state and have nowhere to go. So still I kept quiet. Paul tried to get me to have sex. I refused. Anytime we were alone, he'd touch me or make me do things. Whether at home, at work, or in the car. I honestly wanted to die. Until the day our job went bankrupt and I moved to a different location, where he couldn't drive me. So Steve started too. He'd drive me to work and home, and my time alone with Paul cut down to days when everyone might leave the house. My stomach stopped hurting as bad. And after a while, I felt a little better. So I told Steve I cheated on him. I spent about 3 hours crying and telling him the entire details. All the messages, how I pretended I enjoyed it. And he says, "I forgive you." He says, "To me, it sounds like sexual coercion." He told me it sounded like he made me feel like I couldn't say no. And I agreed inside, deep inside. But outside I felt like a disgusting cheater and a liar. And no matter what I said, Steve forgave me. I wanted to think it was all Paul's fault, but I also believed it was all mine. I begged him not to tell his sister. I didn't want their kid to watch his mom and dad fight, and to be honest, I didn't think she'd take the news the same way Steve did. I felt guilty she'd hate me. I was afraid of so many things. I still am. I thought everything would be okay. Now that I came to terms with the fact I didn't want to do it, I could say no. But then one day I was home alone with Paul and his son. I was babysitting his son because Paul is a bad dad, and his mom asked me to. His son lay down for a nap, and Paul sat down next to me on the couch. I was nervous, and Paul's son wanted to cuddle, so I kept him on the couch with me. Paul made him lie on the floor. His son is barely asleep, and Paul starts touching me. Right there with his son, I said, "No, I'm not okay with this. Not in front of your son, he'll turn around and see, and it will scar him, or he'll say something." Paul said no, he won't. I said no, but he wouldn't stop. I gave up, and I told him fine, but we have to go to another room. He touched me, and I didn't pretend I liked it. He kissed me, he made me touch him. I was literally praying for it to end. My stomach started to hurt, I started to feel sick. And then a miracle happened. His dad, who was staying there too, walked into the bathroom. Right outside where we were. He nearly caught us. But he didn't, and Paul stopped. It was over. I told Steve. I told him how trapped I felt. He helped me to message Paul and say no more anything. And he told me not to worry, that he would never leave me alone with Paul again. And he started saving money so we could move. We moved, and I have been trying to get over it. I feel like a dirty cheater still. Because I said yes, I pretended I liked it. I have night terrors about it, and when I think about it, my stomach hurts. Steve lets me talk. He listens. I had met her in person once. She was the new girlfriend of one of my friends who had moved away. We became friends on FB, chatted, exchanged memes, etc., then phone numbers. We would talk on the phone at least once a week. We seemed to have a lot in common. It was nice. It's hard for me to make friends in our area, lots of small town BS. She told me the same, that her anxiety made it difficult for her to not take things personally, but that she was working on it. Wow. Me too. We were bonding. Anyway, a year later they were coming to visit for a week, and I was jacked. He was coming down to take a 2-week fire training course, and she took a week off to spend it with him, with us, then flying back home out of province. It was looking to be an absolutely amazing week. We were texting back and forth for hours a day in the month leading up to the visit. At first everything was okay, but slowly I began to see how out of control her anxiety really was. She would lash out at my friend for not acting like my husband. Well, I mean, he's not my husband, you shouldn't expect them to act the same, and it's not like this wasn't fine before. Listen, BF is a super sweet dude, kind of oblivious, and kind of completely high energy. Imagine a puppy in a human body. My husband is basically a capybara. Yeah. They're not comparable. She was one of those kinds of girls who checked Instagram likes. As in, I saw somebody named X liked and commented on your photo. How do you know her? Harmless question. Once. She interrogated him about all the local girls that liked his posts about being back for a visit. Told him to block a few. Yikes. When he wasn't around, she asked me who they were. Now, BF and I are friends, but we share 0 circles, and he's like that with a lot of people. I honestly couldn't put a face to 95% of the names she tossed at me. She got upset and took a nap. I went to get the mail. I ended up having coffee with a gentleman I knew from a past job. She still wasn't awake when I got back, so I started cooking supper. She had some dietary restrictions that would have been nice to know about before I bought groceries for the whole week and planned a menu that contained at least one major thing a day she couldn't have. We adjusted, but it was not easy. They were a low alcohol couple, which we knew, so I used my past experience as a bartender to whip up some killer mocktails. She wouldn't drink them because they were just as bad. What? She was kind of a lump? Never wanted to do anything, never agreed or disagreed on plans, very non-committal. My personal pet peeve. I can't fucking stand fence riding. I'm a photographer, and I love historical sites. Ergo, they wanted couples photos. I asked if I could take some at a local heritage site. The site said yes, and then both of them proceeded to waste my time being goofy shits. I was not happy. It was a perfect day for light, etc. thunderstorms rolling in and everything. Ugh. Such a wasted opportunity. But since she spent literally an entire hour looking for the guy, I now know that her ex-friend's ex-boyfriend had a cousin that looked just like Ed Sheeran. After a rainy, yucky day, we decided to just order pizza and play video in the basement. Hubs and I spent a lot of time decking out our home theater. We have a 140 screen in our basement. Video games on it in 4-player mode are amazing. Naturally, she didn't tell us that she gets motion sick from Mario Kart and played until she was puking in the next room. We told her we could switch it up to a movie, and she declined. So she sat there just watching, making herself more sick. Her anxiety got really bad at the prospect of going to her other couple friend's place, so she wanted to hang back. Okay, but she wanted her BF to stay back too. She knew that the barbecue was for him and that we were going to surprise him with some of his other local friends. A shit show ensued when my husband accidentally let the surprise barbecue slip. And it was an accident. She thought we did it on purpose to manipulate her. Sigh. Everything moved to our house, which was just too far out of the way for one friend who could only make it for about 40 minutes anyway. He was super upset he couldn't come, and so was BF. Pretty sure that's the exact moment their relationship began to break down. Well, then she pulls another dick move. They had both driven down in his truck. One 8-hour day drive and one 12-hour day drive. They camped the night between by a river. It was awesome. Awesome enough to repeat. She didn't want to fly home anymore. She wanted him to drive her home. So he added another week of time off so he could drive her home, then rest a day and drive back to our province. In his truck. His gas-guzzling truck cost as much in fuel as her plane ticket would have. It was insane. He ended up bumping the second half of his course a week as well. When they drove off at 9 a.m., I took a nap and slept till 6 that evening. Then a full night again from midnight to 7:30. I was that drained. The plus side was since he bumped a week in his course, his friend who couldn't make the barbecue was now on days off, and we spent a whole day at a food festival together. Right? No. She saw our Instagrams and essentially told him to stop having fun. Lol. No. We went kayaking, dirt biking, garage zolling, you name it. We even got him an ice cream cake when he got his certificate. She got upset because she didn't get any cake? Yeah. Anyway. Through all this he acted like it was all normal. I called him up and told him my feelings. My husband told him pretty much the same thing. They broke up about 6 months later. He's coming to visit us again in less than a month, and I'm so excited. So we never actually met but were supposed to. Therefore, I shared my address with him. We shared a common interest for many years on a forum, talked all day, and basically became best friends online. Eventually he got comfortable enough to start sharing some dark stuff about himself, how he had almost murdered a woman who tried to help him in a hospital, and so on. He had severe mental issues, it turned out. Anyway, so I tried to continue like normal, since he said he was good now. He already knew my address and knew about my family via Facebook and so on. One day he starts acting really strange, making up stuff about how I will betray him like everyone else and how I suck, etc. Tried to calm him down, but he just went on. Eventually, he did calm down and said he wanted to make it up to me. So a quick note here. I like to collect expensive figurines. What kind is not important. But one day I get a package that turns out to be from him. It's a very nice and expensive figurine of the kind I like to collect. I am, of course, very surprised and almost a bit shocked by this, but I thank him a lot, of course, and tell him to please not do that again, even though I really like the present. He says he will come over soon to meet me, and I agree to it. Months before he's expected to go, he has another weird episode, but this time it takes the cake. Same pattern where I'm against him and that I will leave him. But this time when I try to calm him down, he says that I'm a fucking traitor and that when he comes over to my country, he will kidnap my niece and slit her throat. She was 1.5 years at the time. I told him that if I ever see him, or if he ever tries to contact me again, I will call the police. I then also made sure he got banned from the forum, and I then blocked him everywhere. He never tried to get in touch again, and I never heard anything again from him. My best friend met this guy playing Company of Heroes 2, let's call him Steve. He was a bit crazy, but it was fun having him on TeamSpeak. He had a group of 6 guys he was playing CSGO with, and so we all played together. Pretty much all of the guys were a bit crazy but the funny kind, except one guy that was super chill and nice, let's call him Doc. We played together for maybe a year, and New Year's was coming up. Doc had the idea all of us could come by and celebrate together at his place. He lived about 200 kilometers from where I and my best friend lived. We weren't sure if we really wanted to go in case the whole thing got out of hand and we needed a different place to stay, but we decided we could sleep in the car if it got that bad. Well, on the 31st we went. When we got there, Doc and Steve were there, and they seemed nice. Steve was definitely way more awkward than we expected, but Doc was even nicer than he was on TeamSpeak. Some time goes by, and the other 4 guys show up. They were definitely just as crazy as they were on TeamSpeak. The evening goes on, and everything is fine. Then someone puts on Erica, and all of a sudden the whole thing turned into a Reichsparteitag. The Hitler salutes came out and everything. My friend and I just looked at each other with this WTF face. None of them showed any behavior like this in the past year. Except Steve maybe, but that guy was legit crazy, and you could only take 1/10 things he said seriously. Well, we now knew we would cut off all ties with them, but we were no longer sober, and it was maybe 11 p.m., so there was no way we could just leave now. So we stayed but a bit more distant and to ourselves. I noticed Doc didn't take part in that whole act. We also had an explanation why none of them seemed to like the fact we brought a hookah with us and why it magically broke even though it was on the balcony and nobody went there. Smoking hookah is mainly associated with Arabs and Muslims in my country. We felt some sort of hostility towards us, but nobody said or did anything. It was all subliminal. Well, midnight came, and we all went outside to let off the fireworks. The guys brought crackers that were illegal in our country and started chucking them towards the group, causing everyone to dodge these miniature hand grenades. This certainly started to tip the mood. 2 of them started throwing all kinds of insults at each other and were about to throw punches, but Doc stepped in and calmed everything down. I should mention Doc was a 2 meters hunk of muscles and a soldier. After that we go back inside. The evening continues, and everyone is getting more and more drunk. My friend and I kept our alcohol consumption at a minimum as we didn't really feel safe anymore. The situation was not stable anymore. It felt like the whole thing could go up in flames any minute. And so it did. At about 2:30 a.m., Steve started to scream and hurl insults at one of the guys, who didn't like that at all. He jumped up and started charging Steve, but his buddy got him at the neck of his t-shirt, tearing it apart in the process. We now had an angry 110 kilograms guy trying to turn 50 kilograms Steve into mush. Doc was at this point frustrated and just looked out for his furniture and didn't care what happened to Steve. My friend, on the other hand, did and got between them. Not a good idea. As we later learned, a couple of the guys decided to sniff some speed, and the angry 110 kilograms guy was one of them. Now my friend was the target of Steve and the big guy. But both didn't have the courage to do anything, as my friend did powerlifting and had quite the impressive muscle-to-body ratio. Well, now it turned into a Mexican standoff with everyone yelling and throwing insults at each other. This went on for at least 1.5 hours. At about 4 a.m., the Doc had enough and kicked the big guy out. The rest of the evening was me and my friend sitting in a corner waiting for everybody to calm down and go to sleep. My friend and I slept for 4 hours, and at 9 a.m. we got up. We packed our stuff, got in the car, and left for home. We deleted and blocked all of them. We don't really talk about the whole ordeal, we only refer to it as the worst New Year's Eve we have ever had. P.S. Neither I nor my friend are the type that goes to parties where you can expect a fight, nor do we have anything to do with drugs, not even weed. After college, I went on a month-long road trip up the east coast of the US. Started in Florida, went up to Connecticut, and then headed west to Wisconsin. I'd posted on YouTube saying I was making this trip and looking for people to stay with along the way. One stop, I thankfully only had planned on staying there for a few hours, was in North Carolina. It was some farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere. I knocked on the door, and like 5 kids answered. All ages 10 to 13. No parents in sight. I thought it'd be fine and that I'd only be there for a few hours, and I wanted to take a break from driving anyhow, so I stuck around. I asked if they had anything to eat while I was there, and they led me into the kitchen. They'd all been pretty awkward and quiet through all this, but it seemed normal enough. They're just awkward kids, right? They pull out some bread and peanut butter. I ask if they have any silverware, and that's when I realize that the 5 of them are semicircle around me, fully blocking me in. I'm standing in the corner of this kitchen against their countertop, and the 5 of them are just quiet and watching me. One kid who hadn't said anything in the half hour that it's been since I've arrived stepped forward with his hand shaking violently. I just asked for silverware, so he pulls his hand from behind his back with this massive knife. He's shaking and just says in this small, scary voice, "Here's a knife." And I just put my hands up and backed even further into the corner. Whoa, what's this shit? What's going on? Getting fully ready to punch a child. He immediately set the knife down on the counter and backed away. Said he was trying to make a reference to one of my old YouTube videos where I used a huge knife to make a sandwich. Scared the hell out of me. After that, I stuck around and played some Smash Brothers Melee with them for a while, then ducked out. I didn't regret it at all, but I was really good friends with a guy I met on Yahoo Messenger when I was around 12, who I ended up meeting. We would talk on and off for 6 years after that and always got along super well and enjoyed talking to one another when we did. We had each other's phone numbers and would text and even remember a phone call one time super well that we've talked about a couple of times. I told him pretty much everything and would talk his ear off, which is crazy because I was a pretty shy and introverted teen. We both dated other people and went through most of our teen years only being good friends. Although I had feelings for him, I honestly always assumed he wouldn't be / wasn't into the long distance thing, so I never tested the waters, I guess, other than some harmless flirting. Then at 19, he would have been 21, we both confessed we had feelings for each other and have liked forever. We dated for a year-ish before he decided he was going to move down to where I live, and he did just that. This was before he had ever even met me in person, so it was a pretty huge leap and scary, though he never admitted he was scared. Lol. Seeing him in the airport was so surreal and awesome. I was nervous about my looks, and he just saw me, and we both smiled and hugged. We've been together for 7 years now, got married, and we're expecting our first child in November. We met in EQ with my then current boyfriend at the time. We talked for years, playing together and so on. We even went to WoW when it came out, the 3 of us playing and chatting. We'd chat on Vent/TeamSpeak/phone for hours. The BF and I broke up, as will sometimes happen. Life, you know. Friend and I still talked. Met up with a new guy, together for a year. He, the friend, and I play together. It comes up in conversation that we're looking for an apartment, we're living with my dad, and he and his girlfriend are expecting a baby. To be considerate, we leave so they can use the space for the baby. Friend says, "Oh, bro. I have a house I keep, we can be roomies." We figure, let's go meet him and talk about options/expectations. We coordinate and show up at his place. It's a really nice house. He comes out and tackles me into a hug. It's like a very graspy hug, I am not a specifically touchy person. We go in, and he shows us around. It's like 5 bedrooms, a huge kitchen, a pool, and a barbecue. It looked extremely well taken care of, with no pets or kids. The lawn was lush and manicured. We'd take the last room and pay each $1,300 a month. When I ask why, since it's 1 room for 2 people, he snaps and says he's got bills to pay. When I explain we have our own bills to pay too, and we could afford $1,300 together, but not twice, he asks us to leave, citing that we're too poor and are cheap to commit. He blocked us on WoW, FB, and everything. Years of friendship gone in a 45-minute long meeting. A few years later, he emailed me, trying to apologize. He was under severe stress from his mother, who owned the house, to help pay the house payment. He'd been through tons of roommates under the pressure of his mother demanding high rents. He'd been unemployed for weeks and was struggling with interviews and rejections. A huge sob story. It ended with, "Things are way better now, would we reconsider being roommates?" I replied that I was sorry to hear things were going so poorly at the time and that I hoped it got better. I said we were in Anaheim, in our own apartment, and unable to break our lease, that shit is expensive, but thanks for the offer. He said K, and I haven't heard from him since. Sad, but glad we didn't try to make that living situation work. I was friends with a girl on Facebook that I had been acquainted with in high school. We weren't super close, we had 1 class together. Anyhow, we became friends on Facebook like 6 years after high school, and we got super close over the next 8 years. Fast forward to last year, and she and her husband were looking for an affordable place to rent. She lived in the Phoenix metro area, and I lived in a small town about an hour away from the Phoenix area, where rent is very cheap. I give them our property manager's number, and they come to look at a 4BD house a few streets over. The rent is cheaper than what they were paying for a 2BD apartment, and she works from home, making like $40 an hour, so they decide to move here. I'm pretty excited. I consider her my best friend. So the weekend of their move comes, and my husband and kids end up with the stomach flu the first day, so we are unable to help them unload their U-Haul. She's one of those people who posts every thought and feeling on Facebook, so she's talking about how tired she is and how they only had a few people to help. Of course I feel awful, but she didn't want me to come help and expose them to the flu. So the second day of their move comes, and she's begging people to come help them online. My husband is feeling better, so we just showed up to help. My friend is extremely obese. She's complaining about how hard unloading is, so she goes and sits down, while I, my husband, and her husband unload their crap from the U-Haul. About 20 minutes into unloading, her husband disappears, and it's just me and my husband unloading their U-Haul. We take a break after an hour, and I go to use their restroom, and I hear a loud, high-pitched screech. This startles me, and I hear my friend screaming at her husband about fish filters. For the last hour while we've been unloading their U-Haul, she and her husband have been setting up their fish tanks and apparently can't find the fish filters. My husband is visually annoyed. We've been roasting in the 100-degree heat, unloading their U-Haul while they are inside the AC searching for a fish filter. My friend is now wailing like a banshee and screaming at her husband. It's extremely awkward. There are only a handful of boxes left in the U-Haul, so we decide to go home. Her husband asks if we finished with the U-Haul and gets snarky when we tell him there are a few boxes left. Neither one says, "Thank you," and we leave. My husband immediately does not like either her or her husband, and I'm left with a pretty sour taste in my mouth, but I chalk it up to them being stressed with the move. A few days later, she calls me in a panic about their stove. They've never had a gas stove before, and she's convinced it's leaking. She asks if my husband can come look at it. My husband is HVAC certified, so he's pretty knowledgeable about natural gas appliances. When he gets there, he checks the stove, and there's nothing wrong with it. It has a stink when it heats up, but it's not a rotten egg smell. He tells them it's just the oils on the new stove heating up, and it will go away after a while. She and her husband start arguing with my husband, saying it's a gas leak. Finally my husband leaves. Over the next few days, my friend texts me over and over about things she's Googled about the stove and how my husband needs to come check out the stove again. My husband refuses. At this point he can't stand either one of them. So it gets to the point that she calls the gas company. They tell her to evacuate the house and wait for a technician. They stand outside for 3 hours waiting for the technician only for him to check and tell them the same thing my husband did. So a few months go by, and my friend starts making snarky comments on how we haven't invited them over. I had numerous times before they moved, and she stood me up every time, so eventually I gave up, and now at this point my husband thinks they are freak shows and would not be nice if they came over. So I'm trying not to hurt her feelings, making up excuses. The last time I see her in person, they invite us to her son's birthday party at their home. My husband stays home with 2 of our kids and takes my 8-year-old. I don't know anyone at the party, except her parents, whom I know from Facebook. They don't introduce me to anyone, so feeling awkward, I go outside to smoke a cigarette. Her husband yells at me from the door that I need to come and help my friend with the food. I'm taken aback, but I come in, and he tells me that my friend is exhausted from cleaning her house, so I need to make the kids at the party plates of food. I'm very annoyed. She's sitting on her ass while I'm serving food to a bunch of kids I've never met. Their parents are all sitting around chatting. After I'm done, I tell them I have to go, and her husband tells me that I was supposed to help clean up. I can't leave. I'm floored. I get my 8-year-old and leave. My friend doesn't say goodbye, she just ignores me. I don't talk to her for a few weeks online, and she messages me freaking out that I unfollowed her, and what did she do wrong? I tell her I've just been busy. Not interested in bringing up drama that she can blow out of proportion online, like she likes to do. We start becoming distant online. She still tries to guilt trip me about not hanging out in person, which I have absolutely no desire to do anymore. The last straw comes in May when her cat gets outside and goes missing. She's posting frantically about it online, begging people to help search for her cat. I ignore it. I'm busy doing finals for my college classes. The posts escalate. Now she's convinced the 90-year-old neighbor stole their cat. Her husband reports the neighbor to the police. There are only 3 police officers in our town, and my friend calls the police. She's posting updates every 20 minutes now. Here's how the posts go. She's waiting outside, and the police haven't gone to the elderly lady's house. The elderly lady had to steal the cat because she said she saw the cat on the day it got out. The old lady is a piece of shit that abused animals. The police come after 2 hours, talk to the lady, and leave. My friend is crying and shaking because the police didn't search the house. There is no justice. My friend is going to call Animal Protective Services and Adult Protective Services on this old lady because fuck her, she stole her cat. That old bitch needs to pay for what she's done. They are going to figure out how to get into the lady's home to get their cat back. It's at this point I unfollow her crazy ass. This is a level of insanity I can't handle anymore. What's worse is there are people encouraging her to ruin this old woman's life, with no proof that she has the cat. Anyhow, a couple of days later, someone on the other side of town posts a picture of her cat, saying it showed up a few days ago, trying to find the owner. So she gets her cat back. I look at her profile expecting her to feel bad about blaming their neighbor, but nope. They are convinced the old lady was scared after the cops came and went and dropped the cat on the other side of town, so she didn't look guilty. WTF? A few weeks later, a mutual friend tells me crazy friend made a childish post about what a horrible person I was because I didn't volunteer to search for her cat and bragged that she unfriended me. I checked, and sure enough, Psycho unfriended me. Hallelujah and good fucking riddance to her and her crazy husband. Boyfriend and I ran a guild in Warcraft back in the day, and one of our guildies flew into town from across the country to meet his internet girlfriend. We invited them to meet up for drinks. He barely spoke the entire time, which was weird because he'd always been hilarious and witty and vent, voice chat, and she was an unfriendly, snippy whiner. I asked her to come outside with me for a cigarette. I thought maybe she didn't like him and didn't know what to do about the situation, as he was staying at her house. Turns out he told her I was his ex-girlfriend, and when she, rightfully asked why we were all getting together for drinks, he said, "We agreed that we have to make sure we're really over each other." Never had such a completely confusing and awkward time. I thought we were going to have some laughs about PvP, and he was going for some sort of epic girl fight drama. When we came back in, I said, "I'd like to make it very clear for the benefit of everyone at the table that Mark and I never dated. I don't even flirt with him in-game, I have other rogues for that." Boyfriend was confused but laughed. Mark turned red and continued staring into his beer. He did end up staying with her that night but flew home the next day. Pretty sure he told her that long before the idea of meeting up was floated and then just stuck with a lie. The longest 2 beers of my life. I and this girl were both in the same fandom and have been talking several times a day from 2011 to 2016. At the time, she was the only person I considered a friend. I was in a very bad place mentally then. I was very depressed and struggling. We'd been best friends for 5 years when I told her I and my family were going on vacation in her country, and I was hoping we could meet one day. She was really happy and told me I should spend the entire weekend at her place. I agreed, and I've been counting the days until we were supposed to meet. Summer comes, and we do meet, and she is just as great as she was online. We spent the day outside, talking and laughing and being teens, and in the evening we went to her house. She lived with her brother and her parents. Her parents were really nice, but her brother was very weird. He kept making inappropriate and sexual jokes and gestures and being gross. On Saturday her parents prepped the pool for us to swim in, and her brother insisted on joining us. He groped me and pushed me under the water several times while trying to shove my face towards his crotch and brushing it off as playing whenever I called him out on it. When I told her about her brother's behavior and how it was bothering me, she actually got upset with me and said I was being weird. That's when I stopped considering her a friend, and I faked an upset stomach so my parents would come and take me back to the hotel. She tried to apologize, but I ghosted her afterwards. I spent a lot of my late teens and early 20s on the internet, especially on MMOs. My social life imploded because of leaving school early, so the internet was how I got to talk to people regularly before social media became a thing. One of the games was incredibly social and had chatting features that even to this day blow other games out of the water, and as a result, I've made quite a lot of meaningful friendships. I've met quite a lot of these people, having both traveled to see them and them traveling to see me. I even had a bloke from Aussie fly all the way to the UK to hang out with me and a friend of ours. All the times I've met somebody have been great except for a single occasion. One of my closest and long-term friends lived in Europe. I'm going to ramble a bit for backstory, which will be relevant to the ending later. We had known each other for a very long time and were extremely close. At some point, she unfortunately had a miscarriage, and she came to meet a vent. At the time, her boyfriend wasn't so attentive. I'd be on a Skype call with her playing WoW, and I could literally hear him in the background gabbing away with his friends. They never did anything together, which is probably why she came to me. At some point she became flirtatious, and I didn't rebuke it. One night she told me, I need to find a way to get out of this relationship. He lived with her and had moved to be with her from the opposite end of the country. They also met through the internet, go figure. And not one of my proudest things to admit, but that was enough for me to feel okay to flirt back, with some brief sexting. While all this was happening, we had planned for me to come visit the two of them, and the boyfriend was okay with it. But now the trip was being talked about as if it would be just the two of us. Their relationship was pretty much dead, and she expected him to be gone. And then she found out she was pregnant. This time it was accidental, and she wasn't expecting it at all. She was still hurting from the miscarriage, the baby that she had hoped would save their relationship. It's not my place to judge whether I think that's a good reason to have a baby or not. She saw it as a second chance for the child she desperately wanted and decided to keep working on the relationship. I respected that, and the flirting and sexting stopped immediately. We still pushed ahead with the idea of me visiting, though. He and I interacted enough that we weren't strangers, and he and she were still close and still had so much history. So why the hell not? So the trip happens, and for the first week, it's a blast. Slight bit of awkwardness of adjusting to each other and sharing a live space together, but no issues or anything. Then the final day comes, and she invites me out for breakfast, just the two of us. I thought we were going to just go to a cafe or something. Instead, she drove us to a secluded little spot in the mountains. We sat at the edge of the sea, surrounded by cliffs and islands in the distance. It was beautiful. And we were completely alone. She had made a picnic for us, complete with a basket and blanket. It could be suggested that it was a romantic environment. And I noticed she was making a lot of fixed eye contact. More than the previous few days. If she was hoping for something to happen, she never said anything. In my mind, she's still with her boyfriend, so that automatically puts her in my friend zone. How often can a guy say that about a woman? I wasn't thinking of anything out of the ordinary at all. We have our picnic, and it's a lovely time, and we head home. On the way, she's kind of quiet. That's unusual. We stop at a fast food place to have stuff for lunch later, and she seems visibly annoyed with lots of short responses. I'm fine. No, thanks. I know when somebody doesn't want to talk, so I didn't push. We got back to her place, and things seemed normal after that. The trip ends, and I make it back home. And somehow what we had before had changed. She wasn't as talkative, and she slowly stopped playing the games we had played together. What the hell happened? I wondered. I brought it up, and she said everything was fine and was sorry for being quiet. I was baffled. Then a few weeks later I changed the banner on my Facebook to a picture I took of the place we had breakfast at. She commented, "Is that where we had our breakfast date?" Date? What? And then it hit me. Had she been hoping for something to happen between the two of us? Was that why she was quiet and annoyed on the trip home? It seemed inappropriate to bring it up at this point, especially as she'd given birth to her child now. Sadly, the friendship was never the same. And I still don't know if it's something I did, something I didn't do, and wouldn't have done, or if it was just something that would have happened anyway. At first I was worried it was me, but 90% of the trip was great, and none of the many other people I've met have been different with me after we met, so I like to believe it wasn't me. I regret the trip because I lost somebody very important to me. We're still friends. This turned out okay, but we had only been face to face a few hours when I had this moment where my heart leapt into my throat. It's a long one, but I'll try to pare this down as much as I can. I have a really good online friend I met through some fandom sites. Eventually, we got to the point where we'd Skype regularly. The summer after I graduated college, he was going to a convention in Baltimore and said I should come. I drove from Denver to Michigan, parked my car, and the next morning we took his Jeep to Baltimore. I looked at the Jeep and thought my car seemed more reliable, but he'd bought his used about 6 months prior and wanted to take it, more room. Okay, cool. On the Ohio Turnpike, we get pulled over by a cop for touching the solid white line with our tire. Makes my friend go sit in the back of his car. That's weird. Then he comes up to my window and asks me to get out of the car and take about 10 paces away from it. Seems weird for something the driver did, but okay. The second vehicle shows up, and a guy gets out with a dog. They say they're going to have the drug dog smell the car. The dog gets up on the passenger side headlight and starts scratching at it. In my mind's eye, I can see them taking the headlight off and pulling out a whole brick of cocaine or something the prior owner left behind. They search the car for another 20 minutes or so. Find nothing suspicious except they want to know who has the blue suitcase. Well, I do. They then produce a little plastic baggie and ask if I have ever seen it before. I have seen enough episodes of Cops to know the right answers are not those aren't mine or I've never seen it before, but those aren't mine, and I've never seen it before. I take a closer look and realize what it is. I didn't own my own luggage, so I borrowed some from my parents. Sensibly, in case of unexpected cancelled flights or what have you, they keep a couple of days worth of all their prescriptions in their luggage at all times so they can't forget them. So, I now have a little baggie of my dad's pills, including morphine and coercion, which I have transported across many state lines. But it's only a couple pills, and there is also metformin, amlodipine, Lipitor, and other standard older dude drugs that a junkie wouldn't be interested in, so whether he believed me or just didn't want to do all the paperwork for like 8 pills, they let us go and told us to flush the pills at the next rest stop, which I did. They let my friend out, and all they told him was, "You can go. We found some drugs in your buddy's bag." So for a bit he instantly regretted meeting me. He gets in the car and glares at me and just says, "Really?" Thinking they meant cocaine or something. I explained it to him, we laughed it off, and are still friends to this day. I was part of a close group of friends I met in tribes too, and I was 13. We were all friends well into my early 20s. The leader of the group was living with his parents and came on IRC with a big sob story about how his parents' house was being foreclosed on. I felt extremely bad for him and offered him my spare bedroom in my apartment. He quickly said yes, and I laid out ground rules that night. 1. I'd pay for his bus ticket, $234, but the expectation was that he'd eventually pay me back. 2. He could live with me rent-free for up to 6 months, or he'd have to leave. 3. Chores were a 50-50 expectation. He agreed to all of this. 8 months later, he still hasn't paid me back for the bus ticket. He's quit 3 jobs that I personally found for him. I caught him ordering PC parts on Newegg. He's 2 months behind on rent, and behind my back he was telling our friend group and his parents I was extorting him for money. So his parents were harassing me via text and voicemail constantly, and he denies saying anything to my face. He went behind my back to my parents to beg them for food and tell them I was starving him and tell them how awful I was. So, I sit him down one night and say, "We have to figure this out, it's not working anymore." He denies all of this and says he loves living with me despite all this proof I have. I handed him a piece of paper with all the money he owes me and why he owes it to me, and it's close to $2,000 plus. He swears up and down he'll get the money. A week later he disappeared and went home with his parents. The friend group ended up disowning me for how badly I treated him. I was dating an online friend once, who lived a state away, so we planned to meet up at a convention between us. This guy was all talk, telling me things that were obviously not true, but I was 16 at the time and didn't really know better, so I had to drive to get him, go to the convention, take him back to his state, and then back home for me. This wasn't the worst part, though. At the convention, more of my internet friends who lived within the state were there, so we all decided to meet up at my hotel room. My partner was a turbo spurg who had never touched a 3D woman in his life and was more than likely on the spectrum. He tried to get intimate when we were alone, but I was uncomfortable, so I didn't let it go far. Soon enough, my other friends came around, and we had a room party. My female friend jokingly said, "Guys, don't forget about the orgy later," and we all laughed, but my partner took it to the head and started to get excited. It was a long day, and I and my friends were still in cosplay, so we decided to get comfy and get undressed. My partner was watching the entire time and touched himself as we got dressed again. He kept asking when the orgy was going to be, and my friends and I didn't know how to break it to the lad, so we kept saying it would be soon. Fast forward a couple of weeks, I had returned the guy back to his home, broke it off with him, and didn't think anything of it. Back on the internet side of things, a Discord call went down with another friend group of mine, and my ex-BF was in it. He was claiming that he had crazy hot sex with me and had the orgy of his life while at the con, but my other friends were skeptical and knew it wasn't like me to just screw without thinking. He kept talking all this talk to everyone he called and commented on posts about his experience. This is only somewhat relevant because the regret didn't last, but I think it's an important story nonetheless. When I was 15, I responded to a YouTuber on Twitter because he was talking about the book/cartoon The Halloween Tree, but he couldn't remember the name of it. I fucking love that cartoon, so I jumped in with the name, and he responded and retweeted me. End of interaction. However, because of this, some kids started following me. They would respond to the art I posted, and we started talking pretty much every day through Twitter DMs. We talked for months and months, going on years. They were from a southern US state, and I live in Canada, so for a while we thought we would just have to be friends on the internet. They ended up saving up money and asked if they could come up for my 18th birthday in August, and of course I was stoked and beyond nervous. We had talked on the phone but never video chatted, which was spooky territory. However, we made the plans, and they came up for a few days. The meeting was a weird mix of holy shit yes. And God, how do you talk to people in real life? but the fact that neither one of us was an axe murderer was just mesmerizing to both of us. We had so much fun that week. 18 is the legal drinking age here, so I got to take them out to bars and shows, and seeing them stoked to drink legally was hilarious on my end. We ended up going out to the mountains on a road trip with a couple of my local pals, and we got into hoodrat shit and broke into the fanciest suite at the fanciest hotel and managed to stay there for an hour before getting yelled at. It was up there, sharing the cigar we found on the balcony, that they told me how much they liked me, and we kissed. I really tried to make it work. This was one of my best friends, and we were so close, but I was really figuring out my sexuality at the time, and it fucked me up. It took until the next time they came up, about 8 months, for us to talk it through. I was horrified. I loved them so much, and I didn't want them to hate me. I had figured out I was pretty much just into girls, and when I had to explain this, it was like walking across a bed of nails. However, it didn't fuck everything up, because they're cool as hell. Way too cool, in fact. I mean, being upset would be completely understandable in the situation, but our friendship was just so fucking great that they were like, obviously I'm bummed, but that won't change your feelings, and I wouldn't give up this friendship for anything. I'm 21 now and they're 22, we've gone to visit each other multiple times, and I would do anything for them. We've spent New Year's together the last 2 years, and both times it's been so amazing. We still talk at least a couple of times a week, and we've started talking about moving to a new city together once we're both done with school. I love them so fucking much. Met a girl on WoW. She was an alcoholic, but I didn't know it yet. Hey, we all have problems and different ways of coping. I had anxiety and depression before that, but the thought of moving to a different state excited me. I was in VA, she was in me. She came to visit for a week, and I went up there for a week. Finally decided to move in. This chick was nuts. She drank constantly. Sloppy drunk. I'm talking about the point that I felt ashamed to have sex with my own girlfriend. I brought her to the beach to meet my friends. She gets plastered. I told her she should probably slow down on drinking for the night. She did not like this. Started acting a fool. She left the restaurant we were in and disappeared. I was worried to the point I almost called authorities. Turns out she was next door banging on the door of a closed restaurant. I finally get her and take her back to the hotel to sleep. Fast forward more, it gets more distant. My anxiety and depression creep back up. I'm away from home and living in a basement with no light in Michigan. Life is terrible lol. She would tell me that the feelings didn't exist and it was all in my head. She couldn't understand how I needed to be on medication then. I don't think she understood she was mostly the problem. This is a girl that would nag me about money to pay the bills when I paid the majority of them and helped pay her $8,000 credit card debt. Sex stops for almost a year. One day I'm sitting there playing WoW, and she's on the bed behind me. She texts me that we should just be friends. What the fuck do you mean? I moved 12 hours from home to be here, away from everyone. The next day I packed up all my shit and left. Less than a year after that, she was dating my old best friend, whom I fucking introduced to her through WoW. They are now married and have 2 kids. My best friend and I played a game of LOL against them once randomly. I was jungle, and he was bot lane. They were a bot lane duo. I told him that if we didn't crush them, I would never speak to him again. OFC, I was joking, but I made it sound serious. I got a gank off on both of them once, so I was happy. We fucking crushed them. Afterwards, she sent me a friend request. I was an adult and accepted and was polite. So, one day I go to play a game with them, and she's drunk. Big surprise. Starts talking about what she's going to do to her husband when they finish the game, which happens to be my ex-best friend. This was uncomfortable. I blocked her and then logged off. Haven't talked to her since. I messaged him the other day. Just saying what's up. In all fairness, he was one of my best friends and is a great guy, but I think he was just super self-conscious and jumped at a situation with a girl giving him attention. Fuck it, though, I'm not mad. I have a way better girlfriend now who has helped me push farther in my life. I recently started college 14 years after high school. Fuck that bitch. I had an online friend from Germany. He was an older guy in his 40s. We had been talking for a year, and he was never creepy or disrespectful. One day, he sends me a satellite image of my house. That scared the shit out of me, and I complained to him, and he said that this behavior wasn't considered weird in Germany, so I let it slide. Weeks later, he says that he has to travel to America for his job, and he says he's coming to California. I was a bit freaked out that he sent me a pic of my house weeks prior, so I didn't ask about meeting up. Fast forward to a month or so later, I get a text from him, and it's a picture of the mall near my house. He wanted to meet me there. I was only 18 at the time, and I was afraid that he was going to come to my house if I didn't. So I met him there. Luckily, it's a public place, and he didn't do anything weird when I met him. Afterwards, I went home and didn't speak to him again. I blocked him on all my social media accounts. That could have gone way worse, but he never did anything bad to me or hurt me otherwise. But he was completely out of line with the stalking. I had a pretty solid friendship with a guy I knew through gaming forums when I was younger. We chatted through texts and played games together all the time. He lived across the country, so meeting was never going to be easy, really, but then one summer he came to stay within an hour of my hometown to check out a college he was thinking of attending at the end of school. We made arrangements to meet up for the weekend, but the only slightly awkward part for me was that he would be with two of his school friends, who I didn't know at all. So we eventually met up, and it was clear fairly early on that the friendship we had online wasn't translating to real life. For reasons I've never fully understood, he told his friends that I was a student at the college who was going to show them around. I'd never been to the town, let alone the college, so that made things super awkward. He also frequently belittled me in front of his friends about my accent. I had a stutter when I was younger, almost as if he was trying to impress them by being the funny guy. That evening they went to a big party at the college where potential students could mingle with current students, and he told me to come along as there was no one actually checking if you'd applied to the college or not. After about an hour of awkwardly standing around while he spent the whole time trying to chat up girls with his friends, he disappeared, and I had no idea where he was for about 40 minutes, at which point I decided I should probably just go. Then I noticed one of his friends and asked where they had been. He told me they found a group of girls who had drinks and weed and were going to spend the night in one of the dorms with them and that I should probably just stop bothering them. They had seen all they needed to around the college. So I went back to my motel pretty upset about how the whole thing had unfolded. The following day I texted him several times to make sure he was okay and asked if he wanted to meet for a coffee before he headed back home. I didn't get a response from him until late afternoon when he asked me to give him a ride to the train station. At this point in time, I'd already given up on the friendship, to be honest, and was on my way back home. I told him he should have messaged me earlier. He called me a great ACT for abandoning him while he wanted a fun weekend away from his family. Yeah, that was the end of that particular 6-year friendship. My brother met a woman online. Not sure how exactly. But they'd exchanged photos and had chatted for several months before a date was planned. He went home after work, showered, dressed up, etc. Made reservations at a nice restaurant in the French Quarter. She was over 40 minutes late as my brother stood outside the restaurant. He called her, and she said one of her headlights on her car wasn't working, so she was going to just go back across Lake Pontchartrain. He told her he could fix it before she left. He's still waiting. Then she called with an excuse about the traffic being bad. He told her to just park, and he'd walk to her. No response. Then she said she was too tired and aggravated, so she was going home. Fine. My brother picked up some Popeyes and went home. Later that night she texted him and asked if he was the man in the blue shirt standing outside the restaurant. He said he was. After that, zero communication. That really pissed me off. He was a bit hurt, but I was so angry. He's a very nice looking man. Above average. What the hell? I thought it was mean. A few years ago I met this guy on Destiny. He was pretty cool, hilarious as hell, and seemed like a good person to hang out with. We shared a lot of the same interests and had the same soldier's sense of humor. After playing a few weeks, we finally get to the "so, where are you from?" conversation. In an insane turn of events, the dude lived across town from me. We start hanging out, and dude becomes my best friend. He never showed any signs that there were things seriously wrong with him mentally. A few months ago, he and his roommate, who had moved into town from out of state a week earlier, were watching my son over spring break. I come home from work to find my son freaked out, almost shaking, and saying that something wasn't right with dude. After the dude goes home, my son tells me that he was acting scary weird. Dude went down to the basement, came back up naked, and was playing with himself while walking around the house. When I called the roommate, he confirmed and said that dude also pointed loaded firearms at both him and my son a few days previously. When I went downstairs, there was a baggie of shrooms lying out on the floor. Needless to say, I went ballistic. Dude denied everything that was said and called every single one of us liars. I knew that his cousin was a street pharmacist and called him out on it. Dude wanted to play hardball and started making threats. Calling the police did nothing, as they said that without photo or video proof, they couldn't make a case. #thanks randomaiapolice. So early in 2017, I met this girl in a mutual FB group for superheroes. We hit it off pretty well and became friends and the best friends really quickly. I did start getting romantic feelings for her, but she was dating this other guy from the same group, but it only ever was an online relationship, they never met in person. Eventually, she broke up with him due to multiple reasons, and I was there to support her. She also had feelings for me too, which we had acknowledged while we were still best friends. July 2017 comes around, we start an online relationship. Now, I live in Canada, and she lived in the US in one of the southern states. She was living in a really abusive household, and I eventually encouraged her enough to leave. At the start of September 2017, she left and started living at a women's shelter. We focused a lot on getting her up to where I was so we could be together in person. Well, come mid-December 2017, she arrives. I'm on cloud 9. In January 2018, my family, she, and I moved to a new place. We didn't know a way to get citizenship for her right away, so we decided on what seemed like the best option: getting married. Now, at the time of us getting married, I was 19, and she was 20. We got married super young. She was my first, and as of right now, only relationship I have ever had. She was my first everything. So, on April 1st, 2018, we officially got married. I shit you not, we got married on April Fools. Around this time, we started looking to see if we could find her birth father. She was adopted super young, lost contact with both parents, mom died, and father was unknown. Well, with my help, we found him. She was happy because she finally had a proper father figure. And my mom was like a mother she never had. In May 2018, we moved to a small town to manage a motel together. We started hating working there little by little, and we had come up with a plan to go down to the States to live with her birth father, his wife, and her kids, one son, two daughters. They were not her birth dad's biological kids, FYI. In mid-August, her dad and stepmom drove up here to come get us. Our plan was simple: we would try living down south, Alabama to be specific, see how it is there, and see where we liked living better. While in the States, I'd work on getting citizenship. The time comes, we get to the border, and I'm denied entrance. I got barred from the States, so we turned around to go back into Canada, and she was denied entry into Canada. So we were forced to be separated. She went to live with her father in the States, while I went to live with my mom and brother, and my mom now managed the motel we had been managing previously. After a week of separation, which we had been arguing about money for, she asks for a divorce. I'm crushed. For the next 2 weeks, I work on trying to win her back. I'm desperate. Finally, she started wanting to talk to me again. We're talking over the phone, and it seems like there was hope for us yet. And then she tells me she cheated on me. With her stepbrother. Yeah, I was devastated. I become severely depressed and extremely suicidal. The motel was next to a highway. I would think daily about jumping into traffic to kill myself. I'd even sit outside the motel and watch the cars go by, wondering if this one or that one would have enough impact to kill me if I jumped in front of it. I wanted to overdose on my meds. I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping, and I didn't do much. My mom took me to see a doctor, and he almost sent me to a psych ward. Thankfully, my mom and brother were the reason I didn't go. If I didn't have their support, I would have been sent there. I was prescribed antipsychotic medication. From then on, a lot has happened. I learned that she had cheated on me before she came up here to Canada, when she was still in the shelter. She broke her promise not to drink alcohol. It was a problem. I'll elaborate if requested. She lied about everything. She never wanted to get married to me. Before we were together in person, before we ever started dating, I said to her if she comes up here and doesn't like living with us, she is allowed to leave and do what she wants. We wouldn't keep her with us if she didn't want to be. A couple of weeks back, she called me to discuss me getting my stuff back. Between then and the last time we had talked, which was this January, she called me a month back, so it had been a while since we talked. Her cat, who was in my custody, died. I and my family have no idea why. Thankfully, she had given birth about 2 weeks earlier to 3 healthy, beautiful, black beans. We call them beans. So as of last we talked, this has all happened. She is dating her stepbrother. Apparently my stuff got stolen by crackheads, some of it got lost in their move, and some she still has. She blames me for her cat dying and accused me of giving her herpes. Now, I had never had sex before I met her. I was a virgin, and I have only been with one person sexually, her. I never cheated. I've never had anything sexual with anyone but her. In November 2018, I got myself tested for diseases. I came back as clean as a whistle. She said I gave her herpes when she first arrived in Canada. According to her, she had cheated on me twice with 2 different guys. My mom said what she had were ingrown hairs. We managed to get rid of the ingrown hairs without any medical help of any kind. Just tea tree oil, tweezers, and maybe hydrogen peroxide. But according to her, I gave her herpes, and yet somehow, I don't have them myself. So in terms of regret, I regret not grabbing all of my stuff from her stepmom's vehicle when we got separated at the border. I thought it would be best that most of the stuff I had packed stay with her in Alabama. That way, I would have less to take on the plane when I got down there. That is my one regret. So yeah. I gave her a brand new, better life. I tried my best to be the best to her and treat her like how she should be treated, like a queen. I always had her back, even when it meant I'd be fighting against my own family. I married young and am getting divorced young. Our marriage date being on April Fool's makes it all seem ironic. I helped her, I saved her, I helped her find her real dad. I can't trust a single word she says, she is a big liar, and I doubt I will ever know the real truth about anything from or about her. Like I mentioned, my biggest regret is not taking all of my stuff back with me. She had my entire movie collection, tons of my favorite clothes, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and a lot more. I just don't feel like listing it all right now. Most of everything of mine that she had were gifts from family and friends. All of it combined probably cost close to $2,000, if I were to give a very rough estimate. I'm really crushed and devastated about that. I have to start my movie collection from scratch. All of my stuff she had/has is very sentimental to me and was very, very valuable to me. That is my regret. It may not have been instant, but I still regret it nonetheless. Never actually met. Here's the story. I met a girl in an online forum. Ended up becoming very, very close friends and would regularly talk on the phone and text. Unfortunately, we lived 6 states away from each other. Without a doubt we would have dated and maybe even more if we had lived closer. We both admitted that. We even discussed a long-distance relationship but realized it would be tough. Well, about 4 years after we met online, my family decided to vacation in her state, and we would just happen to be driving through her hometown. We both immediately made plans to meet up and go on a date the night I'd be in town. I felt like it could have been the night that we kissed and maybe even decided to start a relationship. I saw serious potential with this girl and could even see myself marrying her. Well, the day comes, and we arrive in her hometown. Mind you, this has been planned for months in advance. Literally an hour before I'm supposed to meet her, she abruptly changes her plans and doesn't give me any reason as to why. She says that something came up and she has to postpone the meetup for a couple of hours. Okay, no problem, I can wait. The new time comes for me to leave to meet her, and I haven't heard from her. Mind you, I'm in a very large city that I've never been in, and the location we are meeting is about 45 minutes away from my hotel. I wanted to confirm we were still meeting before I left. Never heard from her. I called and texted, and nothing. It was very unlike her. She texted me the next day after we had already left town, and she gave me a very impersonal apology and wished me a good trip. After that day I didn't hear from her, even after attempting to reach out every so often, until 3 years later when she randomly called me to talk. By then I had moved on and was engaged to be married to my now wife. We briefly spoke on the phone and caught up. That was the last time I ever heard from her. That was 4 years ago. We went from best friends/potentially dating to nothing in the span of one night when we were supposed to finally meet in person. I'm still friends with her on FB, but I haven't spoken to her since that last phone call. I've met a lot of players in real life, and all were pretty good experiences except one. The instant regret happens after knowing one of the guys for a while. Story below. I and 2 of the guys from my Destiny 1 clan met up and played a couple of times. One of them, we'll call him FL, decides he's going to move to California, from Florida, and wants to road trip it out there. I and the other guy, IR, agree, and the third fellow clanmate offers to put us up in his company-owned housing in Arizona. Things were going amazing, we saw the Grand Canyon, Sedona, and were generally kicking it. In the midst of this, FL suggested downloading Plenty of Fish and meeting up with ladies. IR, who had a long-term girlfriend, also downloaded it and proceeded to cheat on his girlfriend. He went all the way with another girl. It's even worse because his girlfriend had some medical issues, and they affected their intimacy, and IR complained about them as the reason he was cheating. It was the equivalent of a girl cheating because her guy couldn't get it up regularly after a surgery. I say regularly because it only caused problems occasionally. After we initially met, I used to work out with FL and IR and hang out in real life before the trip and saw IR and his girlfriend together so many times. They were constantly talking about moving in together and being lovey-dovey, so it was a big shock when IR was so quick to cheat. I stayed quiet and by myself for the rest of the trip and haven't talked to FL or IR much since. I was playing Sea of Thieves and matched with someone local, so we decided to meet up for some beers. Dude turned out to be a super fucking weird conspiracy nutjob with a MAGA hat. He thought Obama wasn't even a person at all, but a hologram, and the big pieces of bulletproof glass in front of the podium were actually part of the technology used to project his image. Like, I can understand believing he wasn't born in the US, or that he's an alien or something. But this dude believed it didn't exist at all. It was like his head just did that scene from whatever old movie that was. He was really nice, but just super fucking weird. Bonus cringe, the Reddit meetup. Holy crap. The woman hosting it wanted us to wear name tags displaying our usernames. I flat out refused, which she didn't like but accepted. This was back when Grumpy Cat was a thing, and she had this awful meme card game, which she tried to get us to play. The night consisted of sharing memes, looking at phones, and awkward silence. She had this wall clock that was so fucking loud. Clunk. 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 It seemed to get louder as the night went on. It was BYOB, but no one else brought anything, nor did they even want it. So I sat there with this other dude, and we crushed a 24-pack of beer while the woman who threw the party glared at us. Near the end, the dude I was drinking beer with tried to kiss me. I'm a guy and straight. Last one of those I went to. At the time I was a sophomore, and the girl I started talking to was an 8th grader. We lived in the same town and started talking through mutual friends on Instagram. At the time I solely identified myself as a lesbian, now pansexual, and she expressed some interest in me. I was not into her like that, but she wanted to hang, so we went to the Del Taco near my house and then walked around a bit looking at some antique shops. There is a wash also near my house, so we decided to check that out because there is a small trail there that leads to the street I live on. Now we were supposed to walk back to Del Taco so she could be picked up by her mom, but when I pointed out my house, she made a beeline for my front door. I was obviously annoyed that she decided to let herself in, but whatever. We go inside, and my mom, grandma, and at the time 1-year-old brother were there. Then, to my ultimate demise, she came up with an ultimate tragic emo backstory and told it to my mom and grandma. I learned later that she lied a lot for attention. She had a fun time playing with my brother while I sat at the computer. Later, when my mom and grandma were not looking, she gave me the grossest kiss on the cheek without asking. Later, when we were waiting in the car for my dad to come drop her off at her house, she decided to tell me that she told her ex that we were dating to make him jealous. Turns out this ex was 20-something while she was still 14. The next day she texted me this incredibly long-winded message about how I was the love of her life. I turned her down immediately before she started acting super sad and how it was the end of the world. Now, for obvious reasons, I stopped talking to her. Later I learned that she did this with a lot of different people. All of my friends have had a story and dumb situation that involved her falling in love with them. She was a major attention seeker who changed her sexuality and gender almost every day because she thought it made her look cool. She constantly lied about her past and pretended to be depressed. Thank God I stopped talking to her. Met this boy on Omegle, he was a cutie pie, and we hit it off right away. For about 2 years we chatted on and off, and when it was on, it was amazing, but it would turn off really quick afterwards. I think it was kind of like an online FWB kind of thing. It was weird, but it worked at the time because there were no strings tied. I could do what I wanted in real life and not worry about it, and he could do the same. I was living recklessly during this time, so I enjoyed the freedom. Eventually we decided to try it out for real, he insisted, and the whole relationship changed. I was committed, but he was still his same old self. It was a lot of me asking for more time, attention, effort, and communication. He convinced me to drive halfway across the country to meet him because then our relationship would be real and it would all get better. I packed up a small bag and drove 20 hours alone without telling anyone. It was such a reckless decision that led to a huge argument in my family. So while I was there, I was fighting with my family because they noticed my absence, and when they found out, they were upset. I understand now why they were upset. At the time, I did not. He was nice during my stay, but by day 3 he was telling me I had to go, no real reason. So I cried and left and made my way to my best friend's place that was halfway home. I had never felt so alone and sad. I was heartbroken. I drove 20 hours to be a 3-day booty call and felt like I lost my family over it. He talked to me a few times after my visit, didn't explain anything, just distanced himself. I called him out, and he would just say sorry, nothing else. I stopped contacting him because there was no point. On a positive note, that was an amazing car ride to self-reflect on my life and how my decisions put me in such a shit place. Prior to this, I had never spent time self-reflecting. I make better decisions now. At least I think so. Haha. Girl I'd chat with online who I had mutual confirmed friends. We talked regularly for maybe 4 years, always friendly and never sexual. Just conversation and life advice kind of stuff. Communication fell off for about 8 months, but it was cool. I decided to drop out of college and move to NYC around age 19. My best friend was here, but he was all I had. I messaged the girl, and we started chatting again like we'd never skipped a beat. She told me how she hated the area we grew up in and wanted to try something new, and I said, well, just move to New York, if I can figure it out, then you can. She didn't feel like she could, and I was like, okay, well, if you change your mind, our couch is open to you for 2 weeks to get your feet on the ground. About 2 months later I get a reply that she's in NYC and would like to meet up. Of course I'm like, hell yeah. I go to where she's staying and finally meet, and it's super weird. Her and a few other smoking hot girls and one guy. She offers me ecstasy, and I take it since that wasn't too unusual, but the vibe was off. We go to a rave in the woods, it gets busted almost immediately, and we head back to her friend's place. By this time we're all down. She comes to tell me that she moved there after we spoke and had been working at a strip club and couldn't wait until she moved in with me the next week and couldn't wait to have babies with me. I told her I had a girlfriend and wasn't interested in a romantic relationship, and she kind of lost it. We ended up kissing a bit and falling asleep because I hated my girlfriend, and she was a smoke show, and I was a fucked up immature. She harassed me for a month for my address and threatened to kill herself, then finally went back home after her friend threw her stuff out the window and moved away. We haven't talked since. Oh, this is a doozy. Knew someone in Warcraft. Played a ton, and she painted her boyfriend at the time as an uncouth, hurtful dick. I went full-on white knight syndrome. Met her in real life after they broke up. Met the ex too. Turns out he was a bit of a dick, but I kind of wonder to this day how bad he really was. Anyways, I start traveling 8 hours every weekend to date her, Massachusetts to Virginia. Wreck my car from exhaustion one day on the way back and decide to move out there. Immediately after moving out, there were problems. She was selfish and incredibly hard to communicate with. Had very outsized reactions to criticism. Like if you told her, hey, not a big deal, but you left the door open, she'd start to cry and say what a goddamn bitch she is. She also would complain to people who weighed 300 pounds that she was really fat, she wasn't. Real crazy shit. So I did what any normal person would do. Married her. We lasted a year. It was pretty terrible. Had to choose to either voice complaints and deal with her meltdowns or bottle it up until it exploded out. I tried really hard to make it work. She also made more than me, but we couldn't discuss finances, so I was putting myself in debt trying to keep up with day-to-day expenses because we lived like we made double what she made combined. Towards the end, it actually got a bit scary. She was bulimic but claimed she wasn't even though I kept hearing her puke. And if we had big arguments, it would end with her screaming, "You're right, I'm a bitch, I'm a cunt," while she physically slapped her own face. A psychologist friend told me later that she was basically inviting me to physically and emotionally abuse her. Well, it turns out karma's not always a bitch, sometimes she has a hilarious sense of humor. A year in, she starts talking to someone else on Warcraft and basically does the same thing she did to her ex. Painted me as a monster and that she was trapped in an abusive marriage. She claimed I was paranoid but walked up to her more times than she knows and read the flirting on her screen and saw a series of text messages and exchanged pictures. Guy was a bit of a mess himself, passed out drunk on a railway car, and apparently lost his leg, but that's another story. My first instinct was to save the marriage, but then I had an epiphany. I wasn't happy at all. Why fight to save something that had been so broken for so long? Moved out and filed for divorce. It really had a happy ending for me, though. It seriously forced me to figure out what makes me happy in a relationship. Until then, I had always sought out a bit of a project in people in order to feel some self-worth. After this relationship, I started to rate myself a bit higher and started looking for people with qualities that I actually like rather than people I could save. More importantly, I started to realize I deserved a high-quality partner. Been with the same person for 7 years now, happily married and about to have a kid, so my move to Virginia panned out after all. This is a story of how I met the perfect girl and demolished the relationship we had built. I met her through World of Warcraft in a random Alterac valley. Somehow we grouped up, got talking, and she seemed really cool. She knew how to play and had a great sense of humor. Straight afterwards, another friend and I came up with an idea to play a practical joke, in-game, on our friend Ryan, and she came along for the ride. Ryan was one of the co-leaders of our raiding guild. He had amazing gear and played full-time outside of his studies. We logged into his character while he was out getting drunk, dropped all of his hard-earned gear in his bank, conspired with the other officers from the guild, Keat, and left his naked horde character in the Night Elf City with a note explaining that he had been abandoned and wished him the best of luck trying to survive. When he logged on, drunk, to find his prized character naked in a hostile place with an RP survival kit of some food, flint, firewood, thread, a fishing rod, and other miscellaneous gear, we were in stitches of laughter. She and I kept in touch and would play together a lot over the following year. She had a boyfriend and lived in a different state, but soon we were spending hours in-game together or chatting on the phone, and I was completely enamored. She was perfect. She was smart, funny, sarcastic, beautiful, interesting, and had a great sense of humor. She appeared to have a level of confidence and self-respect that almost no one has, and she even had an incredibly sexy voice, like a phone sex operator. She didn't mince words or talk bullshit, and she knew what she liked. I would spend almost every day wondering what she was up to and looking forward to when I would get to speak to her again. We could tell each other anything, we understood each other intrinsically and grew so close that we could almost read each other's minds. One day, she broke up with her boyfriend. It was over. Not only that, around the same time, I was traveling to a city close to hers for my brother's 21st birthday party, and she agreed to make a 3-hour drive to attend the party and meet me. Afterwards, I would drive back home with her and stay with her family. The anticipation and anxiety I was feeling when we met before the party was overwhelming. I was physically shaking from nerves. I'm shaking right now merely remembering how extreme those feelings were. I'd only been with a couple of girls before that point, and I was completely unprepared for the overwhelming feelings I was experiencing. The moment we met, she was visibly affected too and had slight tears running down her face. She ran into my arms and gave me a hug. I experienced the most happiness I had ever had in my life up to that point, and she was even more perfect than I could have possibly imagined. From this point onwards, it was all downhill. These events happened just over a decade ago. I was 22 at the time, and I was at a rough point in my life. The bowel issues I had left me in poor health, and I was just trying to survive. My self-esteem was low, and socializing comfortably with a dream girl I'd been in love with for over a year but never met was not something I was capable of, and the anxiety I lived with over the next few days was completely unbearable. I was a wreck. I could barely speak, my sleep was disturbed, I couldn't think clearly. I froze at every moment and was completely detached. I had been living a pipe dream, and suddenly I had something to lose. Her family, with the exception of her brother, who clearly saw I was a wreck and did not think I was anywhere near good enough for his sister, was lovely and welcomed me. Even he was polite enough to tolerate me. They put me up, they accommodated my dietary needs, and they were the perfect hosts. She was lovely too. The side of myself I presented was very clearly not the person she had known through hundreds of hours of communication, but she was patient and making the best of the situation. On the second or perhaps third day I was at her house, I came to wit's end and broke down. I hid down the street and called a close female friend back home, sobbing so uncontrollably I could barely breathe. I asked her what I should do, and she offered clear, sensible advice, that I relax, tell her how I feel, and focus on being her friend. That night we were in her room, chatting, and a feeling of sadness suddenly and inexplicably washed over me. She asked, "What's up?" And I responded, "All I can think about is kissing you." She responded in a completely normal, slightly uncomfortable way and politely said something along the lines of "That's not something I'm interested in right now," which was about 40 million light years away from where my unreasonable expectations were at. I went to my room and booked a flight home and then returned to let her know I'd be leaving tomorrow. The next morning when I saw her, I immediately recognized exactly how bad I had fucked up. Her eyes were red, and she said she'd barely slept. I spent the day in the city, meeting another WoW friend nearby, watching Tropic Thunder, and clearing my head. It was just what I needed. I started feeling like myself, a functional human being, and on my return home, I apologized. I told her I was sorry. That I'd messed up. I told her that I now saw what a mistake I had made and that it would be best if I stayed. She responded, "I don't think that would be best for anyone." I could continue with what exactly happened after that point. Or how I felt, or even tell you about how I cried all the way through the trip from that airport to my home hours later, but none of that is important in the context of this story. What I hadn't told you until now is that she was, and assumedly still is, incredibly stubborn because she never spoke to me again. Like 20 years ago. I'm a guy who was 21, and it was a girl who was like 19 to 21. I had a girlfriend, though, and this girl was like twice my size and weight. Met her on Phantasy Star Online and played a lot with her. She lived about 5 hours away and kept trying to meet up, but I really didn't have any desire to. Then she tells me her cousin's wedding is in my city and asks if we can meet up. I was like, sure, and I shouldn't have given her my address. I think the wedding was a lie because she never left to go. Got to my place at like 11 a.m., and the wedding was supposed to be at 3. Around 3 I was going nuts because she was so boring and couldn't take the hint to leave. She was still at my place at 7 p.m. and was talking about how she didn't want to drive back home because she had been drinking 2 wine colors, and the girl was over 300 pounds, and it has been well over an hour. Also, anytime my girlfriend was out of the room, she kept saying stuff like, "I wish it was just you and me hanging out." Anyways, my girlfriend was there the whole time, and I was like, this bitch can't take a hint, and at about 8 p.m., my girlfriend put her foot down and was finally like, "You need to go, and you can't stay here." She was like, "Oh, I've been drinking and have nowhere to go." Girlfriend was like, "It has been several hours, and you will be okay. Call someone from the wedding to stay with." Anyways, she called me later from a hotel and invited us swimming, which I declined. The next day she was knocking on my door, and we ignored her. She came back the following weekend too lol. I just ignored her and acted like I wasn't home. I told her the day after she showed up that I don't like having people over and work a lot, and she couldn't take the hint. 3 months later she was knocking on my door again. I invited John up from California for New Year's, and because I was a bit nervous, I had a local friend stay with us as well. Upon arriving, he revealed to me that he smoked pot. Previously, I had only known him to take medication for bipolar, which I only learned about 3 days ahead of time. This was before it was legal, by the way. Since my mom was driving us, we stopped at my grandma's house to say hello and wish her a happy new year. John proceeded to point out that my grandma had a decorative wine bottle on her counter and started telling her about how much he drinks. He was underage, about 17, if memory serves. He said this and mentioned the pot in front of my mom, who was quite unhappy about the sort of person my new friend was turning out to be. I had to explain to her in private that he never mentioned any of his illegal hobbies to me when we were talking online, and I wouldn't have invited him over if I had known. If you want to get yourself in trouble, fine, but don't get me involved. But I figured it'd be fine, because he wouldn't have access to any of that stuff while at my apartment, and we'd all get along fine. That night, John, Bill, and I were hanging out at my apartment when John asked if I had any snacks. I said, "Yeah, I've got chips, some Hot Pockets. Basic stuff that you might have if you're really, really poor, struggling to support yourself between jobs, living alone." He was disgusted by my answer and said he meant more like a big meal. Something I might have had if I still lived with my mom, living off a steady paycheck. I told him, "Sorry, dude. You know I don't have a job right now, and I live alone in this tiny-ass studio apartment. I'm not sure why you'd think I could afford something big." I think we ended up being able to get a pizza, though, so there was that at least. Thanks, Mom. After that, we agreed we wanted to watch a movie. I didn't have very many at the time, so I suggested some of my lifelong favorites that I had brought with me when I moved out: Cats, Phantom of the Opera, Nightmare on Elm Street, and The Last Unicorn. They're nostalgic, bite me. Bill wasn't in the mood for horror, and John said he hadn't heard of any of the others, so we started with Cats. Almost immediately he said it looked stupid. Well, musicals aren't for everyone, that's fair enough, so we put in The Last Unicorn. About 10 minutes in, he said it looked like shit. We explained, well, it's an old movie, so it's going to look a little different from modern animated films. He insisted, no, it looks like crap, the whole thing. Bill and I at that point were annoyed because all John would do was complain, so we shrugged and said, watch something else then. He proceeded to watch Puppet Master on his laptop, while I texted my mom saying the asshole had to go. After much begging, she agreed to take him to the airport first thing in the morning, and I haven't spoken to him since. Odd story from my end. It's kind of a two-fair since it involves 2 levels of meeting someone I kind of knew in passing and some of his online friends. One weekend in college, before I had a cell phone and before smartphones were a thing, I got a random phone call in my dorm room phone from the brother of a high school friend. We had competed in some Halo 2 LAN parties but never spoke directly, saying one of his teammates was sick and asked if I wanted to go play with his team in a Halo 2 tournament that weekend, and he had a hotel booked and everything. Turns out the tournament was about 1,000 miles away from my house. I was in college, didn't have any plans that weekend anyway other than playing Halo myself, so I thought, what the hell, why not? We decided it would make sense to drive straight through, taking turns driving and sharing the cost of gas, because the tournament started early Saturday morning and it was already Friday when he asked me to join. The dude had Tourette's syndrome, and his tic was that he'd hiss loudly and grab anything to the right of him really quickly, almost like a punch. Throughout the entire trip, every few minutes while he was driving, he'd hiss and punch me in the leg. He took the first shift, and before we left town, he He stopped and bought almost $100 worth of chips and snacks, enough to literally cover the entire back seat and floorboard. So we took turns driving for about 6 to 7 hours with music blaring and the windows down, and it was fine. Then, as he was driving, we hit Tennessee, and he sped up to 100 plus mile per hour. That wasn't terribly concerning, considering a lot of the cars around us were up there too. However, I noticed everyone around us started to slow down suddenly, not slamming the brakes but just alert to something in front. Shortly after, the road cleared out, and it was basically just us and this one car about a mile ahead. As soon as I saw it, I could instantly tell it was a police car, so I spoke up, and I was like, "Hey, that's a cop ahead." He turns up the music and speeds up super close to the car and whips around him and pulls in front. Naturally, he was pulled over immediately, and after a super pissed off trooper lecture, he was given a speeding ticket, and we were on our way. He later got upset and said, "You should have said something if you knew it was a cop." At that point I was pretty upset myself but kept quiet, still excited to be in a Halo tournament. A few more hours into the trip, he says he's tired, and I take my shift driving and turn the music off so he can sleep. I drove another 3 hours or so and started to get tired myself, so I pulled over to a rest stop for a short break, and we switched spots so I could sleep. When we get back in the car, I lay to the side, and as I'm about to fall asleep, he cranks the music to full blast and leaves it there, despite me asking repeatedly if he'd turn it down. We took that another couple of hours, getting fairly close to our final destination, and he wants to switch again because he's tired. Still exhausted, I agree to drive the rest of the way there and turn the music to a normal level while he sleeps. We finally get to the conference center where the tournament is being held after being up the entire night. I got pretty excited because it was the first day I'd be able to participate in a tournament like that. MLG branding was everywhere, and it felt pretty cool to enter the main hall. When we get into the gaming area, he quickly finds his friends and introduces me to them. I ask how they all met, and it turns out it was the first time any of them had met in person. Mere seconds after learning that, I ask about when our team is scheduled to play. I get some odd looks, and there's some back and forth glances between the guy I was with and these other people. Without getting an answer, we start walking around watching other teams play. Everyone is chatting about players they recognize and crazy plays we saw. While walking around a bit, I realize that it's just me and one other member of this small group that are still watching games. The rest of them kind of disappeared into the crowd. So I tell this person with me, whom I'd never met before, that I'd catch up later. I needed to go find the person I was with. At this point I was already pretty convinced I wasn't going to get to play in this tournament. Neither of us had cell phones back then, so we couldn't call or text at all. I walked around looking for him, and I was getting pretty angry. I found one of the people he was talking to before and asked where he was. They didn't know. For about 10 hours, I walked the halls looking around for him between watching various Halo 2 and Super Smash Bros. Matches. When the day ended and everyone started leaving the building, I started to worry a bit about where I would stay that evening since I couldn't find the person that I came with and had no information about the hotel at all, assuming he ever had a reservation to begin with. As they started to lock up the conference center, I noticed one of the people I had met earlier in the day that was supposedly one of his friends. I run over to him and explain the situation. It turns out this kid was like 14 years old and was there with his family. They were nice enough to let me crash on the floor of their hotel room that night. So I ended up sleeping in some random hotel room of people that this person claimed he was good friends with. The next day, I found a payphone and called home. My parents were able to coordinate a flight for me to get home. They got in touch with some family friends that lived in the area, and they gave me a ride from the hotel lobby to the airport. Never actually found out what happened to the dude I drove down with. He vanished shortly after we got there, and I never saw him again. It's been about 15 years now, and we haven't spoken, and I'm still pretty bummed that I never got to play in that tournament. I also secretly hope he freaked the F out after realizing he'd have to drive alone and pay for his own gas to get home. I made the mistake of playing WoW with my brother-in-law's raiding guild. I'm still beside myself when I think about these people. For starters, the horrendously anti-drug guild leader was a drug addict and the biggest hypocrite I've ever met. He allegedly used sexual favors as an all-access pass to raid slots and bank access. He was a monster, and I tried to figure out how he did it since we were never very good. We met at a barbecue, and my Bill was bragging about how cool his friends are. My wife and I had already had very weird feelings about 2 or 3 of them. Turns out one of them brought a gun to the barbecue just in case. Just in case of what I'll never know. He later stole someone's girlfriend and got in a fight with a cop, and a few months later he ended up catching gun, drug, assault, and DV charges. One of them stole a cop car, and the other guy we were weirded out about got caught up with assault against an officer and drug charges. One of the three had already had a DUI, I really don't care to remember which one. Bill's girlfriend was a gem. She was like a little sister to the GM. I often wonder if she caught her HPV from him. Apparently it was a common enough thing to happen. She cheated on my Bill with GL when they were on a break. Bill and she got back together when GL revoked her raid slots and bank access because she wouldn't continue to sleep with him. But still continued to refer to her in a little sister capacity. They weren't very far apart in age. She ended up with the first guy who brought a gun to the barbecue, ended up having a kid, a few domestic violence charges, and gun charges, and now he's in jail and she's a single mom who visits him in jail. Last I heard, she cheated on him while he was in lockup because it didn't count or something. We were all in our mid to late 20s and early 30s. It was crazy in that their behaviors were generally like a group of middle school kids, but they were full-blown adults making all the worst adult choices you could make. Their relationships and sexual relationships and the way they interacted IRL is something I've never seen again in a group of people. I tried not to be a square about it, but the whole thing was a disaster. My Bill got mad. I stopped donating to the bank, so he fabricated a rotten story about me to my Mill, that she still believes to this day. My wife knows it's not true, but it's a thing in the family. Since Mill's baby boy is saying it, it must be true. I have accepted that both of them are sick and have problems a lot worse than even the fake things my Bill spread around. Bill was a school bus driver until he crashed it after playing WoW for too long the 3 days prior. GL got caught up releasing a roleplay sex tape with someone who might not quite have been 18 at the time. One of them would later quit the guild to join another to infiltrate them and sabotage their raid progress and steal stuff. All around it was so fucking trashy. I continued hearing such wonderful things about them through a work friend until we moved out of state. I've never again met someone who didn't know how to grill meat hosting a barbecue. Or people who had alcohol tolerances so low that even the smallest ABV and non-alcoholic drinks fucks me up. This isn't even the half of it, and I remember some being a lot worse, but not off the top of my head. Strangest social situations I've ever been in. I hope to never meet anyone like any of them ever again.